He tried to use his mental power to investigate more, but he was still unable to succeed. Roy shook his head, looked away, and continued walking towards the distance. The location where Roy is now is a hillside not far from the desert, and behind this hillside is an endless forest. It's so strange, that feeling just now. Roy muttered to himself. He looked up at the sky, but saw that the sky had returned to normal. Could it be that thought that he was poisoned just now? Or is he hit by illusion? He has been hit by illusion before, and the illusion of plant weapons is very serious to him. The damage caused can be said to be neurological damage, but he believes that this is not the damage caused by plant weapons. If this is the damage caused by plant weapons, it is also impossible that he has not recovered so far, because his physical body is already very strong, and it is impossible that he will not recover, so it can only explain one problem, that is, he is affected by certain factors. Roy couldn't take it anymore. These guys locked themselves up, but they didn't look for themselves, they didn't talk to themselves. What the hell are these guys up to? They can directly say what they want to do. Why are they unwilling to say it? This is the most incomprehensible point in his mind. He doesn't know what the other party is going to do. Even so, there is another point that is very important. That is, we cannot have any conflicts with them. After all, once a conflict arises for them, it cannot be resolved, not to mention that they have just come to this place and are not familiar with it. If there are conflicts with them at this time, I am afraid it will not be good. The current situation is already too tense and troublesome. In such a tense situation, if you want to get a certain opportunity, you actually said that if you want to survive, you must first work hard and try your best. Roy decided not to sit still. He opened the door and went out. The outside world made him feel completely new. There are no high-rise buildings outside, but some villages and city towers, which are a bit like retro civilization, but they are still very lively, and lively is more of an aspect. It seems very harmonious here. And the people around, including the guards, didn't have any strange eyes on him, as if he didn't exist like air, which made him a little incomprehensible. What exactly did they want to do? Quickly walked to the outside of the city. Originally, he wanted to buy a map about the Dark Continent. After all, he had to figure out the environment of the Dark Continent anyway. Although Roy also knows that the Dark Continent is divided into several plates, it is not an easy task to figure out these plates. It is not easy to fully understand these major plates, because these major plates are all vicious plates, and the more deadly point is that some sectors are still no man's land, so judging from the current situation, if you want to survive, you must first figure out your own situation. Only after you figure out the situation will you know how to follow up. After all, many things are impossible. There is no doubt that someone will do it if you don't do it yourself. Roy, get ready to die. Roy was stopped at the city gate. The opponent is tall and powerful, and looks full of momentum. Roy frowned. It's really that the way of 10,000 people encountered troubles as soon as it came out. The other party is obviously looking for trouble, but he won't admit it, because if he admits it, he will only be bullied by the other party all the time, so he has to show his aura. If your excellency wants to fight, then I am willing to accompany you. The burly man's face turned cold when he heard this. Immediately there was a sneer, and then he waved his fist and threw it at Roy. Roy narrowed his eyes slightly and clenched his right hand into a fist. The moment the fist meets the fist, there is a dull and violent impact sound. A strong shock wave was formed between the two, sweeping towards the surroundings. The surrounding soldiers backed away one after another, while looking at the situation in the field in surprise. I didn't expect to hide my strength, Roy thought to himself. Just now he had a hard fight with the opponent, which made him feel that the strength of the opponent was not weaker than his own. Such opponents are rare. The other party was even more shocked. He thought he would be able to get rid of this guy with one move, but now he felt tingling pains all over his body, as if his bones had been crushed. You. He stared at Roy with wide eyes. At this moment, Roy has loosened his clenched fist, and said lightly, I don't care who sent you. If you want to fight, then I will accompany you at any time. His tone is full of confidence. Although Roy had the upper hand in the collision just now, the other party absolutely didn't know that he had left room, otherwise the ending would definitely be reversed. The other party stared blankly at Roy, and it took him a long time to hold back a few words. You wait. After saying harsh words, he left. Roy didn't bother to pay him any attention. He turned and headed back into town, disappearing around the corner in no time. In the dead of night, Roy lay on the bed, thinking about tonight. Suddenly, the window slammed, and then a slender black figure came in from the window, and quickly rushed into the room. Kindness? Roy opened his eyes, and saw the black shadow falling to the ground. What? Roy was startled, turned over quickly, and looked at the shadow vigilantly. Sombra appears to be a snake. It spits out its core, swims slowly, and makes a slight snapping sound with its tail sweeping on the ground. It's a poisonous snake. Roy reacted immediately, and then reached out to touch his arms. He wore a dagger in his belt. He encountered danger once when he was a child and almost died. Fortunately, his father gave him the dagger for self-defense, and now it comes in handy. The black snake seemed to have noticed Roy's actions, and immediately swung its tail and jumped up with claws and teeth. Roy snorted coldly, drew his knife and slashed horizontally. The black snake roared immediately, twisted its whole body and flew upside down, landed on the ground, struggled twice, and died completely. It's really troublesome. After killing the black snake, Roy sighed and walked over to check the black snake's body. The black snake's body is very thick, and its scales are golden yellow, shining with faint light. Black dragon snake. Roy was surprised. This kind of creature is extremely rare. It is said that it is a pet beast raised by the royal family of Atlantis. He didn't expect that he was so unlucky to meet such a creature. However, why did you come here? Roy murmured suspiciously. After cleaning up the black snake, he turned off the lights and went to sleep. This kind of pet beast that lives in the dark is difficult to catch. Now that he has encountered it, he must hurry up and study it. In the early morning of the next day, it was just dawn. Roy opened his eyes and stared at the black snake energetically. After spending some time last night, I finally figured out the habits of the black dragon snake. The toxicity is really strong, but I have a way to control them. The corners of Roy's mouth curled up slightly. Black dragon snakes like to gather in groups, but they will lay eggs every once in a while, and the frequency of laying eggs is not fixed, so it needs to be prepared in advance. Let's use you as bait first. He put the black dragon snake on the table and observed its changes carefully. At first, the black dragon snake was a little scared, but it soon calmed down. Oh, it seems the effect is not bad, Roy said with satisfaction, and then he took out a piece of meat and threw it on the table. Seeing this piece of meat, the black dragon snake's eyes turned red, and it crawled over eagerly, and then opened its mouth to swallow it. It quickly fell into a manic state, twisting its body crazily and neighing. It really works. Roy chuckled, and then continued feeding. Soon the black dragon snake turned into a puddle of mud, with a foul smell all over its body, and its belly swelled up, as if it was pregnant. We'll see the effect next. Roy rubbed his hands expectantly, and then threw the black dragon snake into the wooden barrel next to him. The black dragon snake was struggling desperately in the wooden barrel, and the water splashed around. However, soon, it calmed down, and began to slowly move its body along the green liquid flowing out of the wooden barrel. Roy watched the changes in the black dragon snake, and nodded in satisfaction. Well, it seems safe. He stood up and stretched his muscles. Suddenly, his ears trembled, and he turned his head to look somewhere. Whoosh! The air burst. I saw a pitch-black sharp blade piercing the air and attacking. This is an extremely sharp dagger with a purple liquid smeared on it, giving it a cold glow. Small tricks. A sneer appeared on the corner of Roy's mouth, and he kicked his foot. Boom. The dagger was kicked away, landed in the distance, stuck on the wall, and kept moving. A man in night clothes came out. I didn't expect you to dare to take the initiative to meet and die. He grinned grinningly, and pulled out his dagger from behind his waist. Without further ado, Roy looked at him with cold eyes. He took out 2 arrows from under the bed, bent his bow and set them up, and aimed at the man. The man's face changed, and he quickly jumped towards the roof. Whoosh! 2 arrows roared and were nailed to the beam, making a buzzing sound. The man looked at Roy with a livid face. He underestimated this enemy. He originally thought that he could succeed in a surprise attack, but he didn't expect that Roy had already taken precautions. Moreover, these 2 arrows can pierce the beams of the house, and their power is much stronger than that of ordinary arrows. It seems that he is a master, and he must be dealt with carefully, the man thought in his heart. Instead of taking another risk, he chose to retreat. Want to go? Have you asked me? Roy drank coldly. He stretched his arms and spread his palms. A ring is suspended above the palm, exuding a hazy brilliance. This is the Lord of the Rings. He activated the power of the Lord of the Rings, and the ring emitted a soft light that enveloped his body. In an instant, a layer of mist rose up, enveloping the spleen. Not good. The man's face changed, and then he rushed to Roy without hesitation, and slashed down with his sword. Swish! The fierce sword light tore through the void and reached Roy's chest in an instant. Clang! The sword light slashed on Roy's body, but it seemed to be slashing on an iron wall. Sparks splashed. The strength of the opponent is very strong. The man was terrified, because the sword light slashed on Roy without causing any injuries. He wanted to ask, but he didn't have the chance. Roy's right hand flexed his fingers and grabbed him directly by the neck. Click. The crisp sound of cervical spine shattering spread throughout the living room. Pooh. Blood spurted out. The man fell to his knees weakly. Roy let go of his hand, and the man fell to the floor, howling in pain. You guys, damn it. Roy gritted his teeth and cursed. He walked over, cut off the man's head with a knife, and then took out a bottle of potion and sprinkled it on body. Immediately, a strong smell of meat filled the room. Roy squatted on the ground and picked up the man's clothes with a dagger, revealing the black robe inside. Really? Roy looked at the black robe coldly. It seems that they are hiding in the black robe. The material of the black robe is very strange. Even if it is soaked in hydrochloric acid, there is no trace of corrosion, and even the color has not changed a bit. Roy frowned. He felt dizzy in his head, which was not a good thing for him. He seems to be manipulated by someone. If it's really like this, then it will be troublesome. No one knows exactly what happened when he lost consciousness. And he didn't seem to have left the room yet. Roy finally realized that it might not be someone who has been in this room. There was a problem with this room, and he didn't understand it at all from the beginning, thinking that they would come from another direction. But I really didn't expect it. They've done it, and quickly. They've done it from the start. This is the most painful thing if you can't guard against it at all. What the hell are you trying to do? If you want to target me, you can do whatever you want, so why sneak around behind your back? Roy was furious. Obviously everything he experienced just now was all fake. No matter what kind of pet snake or man in black was fake, even walking out of the room was fake. But there was nothing unusual in the room. There is nothing wrong with the decoration in the room, this is certain, but there is one thing that goes without saying, that is, he was indeed paralyzed. Is it paralyzed by drugs or from special abilities? Roy sighed. This is a very scary thing for him, whether it is drug paralysis or special abilities. In short, it is very scary that he lost his self-awareness for a period of time. Stop yelling. Everyone here needs to be quiet, and your yelling will only make your own people hate you more and more. I need you to be a kind person. At this moment, the door of the room opened suddenly, and he left alone. This man was wearing a combat uniform, but he was wearing sunglasses, and he was carrying a bag in his hand. You guys are finally here. I thought you guys were just watching from behind and never came out. When I saw someone finally came, Roy breathed a sigh of relief. For him, in the current situation, he just wants to communicate with these people face to face. Only when these people stand up and communicate with him face to face, can he have a chance. All you do is want us to come out and communicate with you face to face, but sorry, I can only tell you this, our communication is conditional. As expected of people from the Dark Continent, no matter what they do, they always aim at conditions. No matter what, conditions are always the top priority. Okay, don't talk about what's there, I just want to know what your purpose is. After all, I don't like wasting time. Roy frowned. These guys have been refusing to come forward before, but now that they have come forward, they must give themselves an explanation. What are they for? You don't have to talk to me in that tone, because you're alive, or you'd be dead. The man smiled coldly. He really didn't expect this guy to have the confidence to talk to himself like this. Because this is still his territory, how dare this guy be so arrogant? Roy didn't speak. Instead, he stared straight at the man, and the man took a step back unconsciously, because the eyes had a strong killing intent. After a while, the man actually grinned. There's no need to make it so serious and tense. I have no malice towards you, and you don't need to have such a good proposal to me, because we are a cooperative relationship, and we will definitely not do harm. The man's tone made the atmosphere much more soothing. After all, it could be said that the air was full of the smell of gunpowder just now, and there was something wrong with a little word. Then there is a high chance of a fight. Of course, although the possibility of Bigness's country is unlikely, there is no need to cause internal fighting, let alone fight one. Since you want to have a good relationship with me, it's hard to talk about your purpose. You must have a purpose in saving me. Roy didn't want to talk nonsense with him, because he knew that this man must have a purpose. It's just that he doesn't know what purpose this man has, but no matter what purpose this man has, in a word, he will never let his own interests be damaged a little bit. When the man heard this, he laughed. Don't worry, we are a cooperative relationship. Since it is a cooperative relationship, we must naturally have the same interests. If the interests of the partners are not the same, then everything will become dull. Be a bit more, it should be clear. The man consciously found a place to sit down. A pair of eyes looked up and down Roy. Looking at this person from outside, he became more and more surprised. But the use value is not yet reflected. but the appearance of this guy here shows that it is destined by the heavens, so there must be use value, which is inevitable. Roy sat on the bed and glanced at the man, then looked out the window, and then said in a very flat tone, "Since it is to cooperate with me, then you have to please me, but what do you mean by sending someone to monitor me? Are you so afraid of me?" Point zero people outside have been watching him. Although he doesn't understand why he is watching him, he hates this feeling anyway. Although it is right that I should not be trusted by them, since we want to cooperate, then the two parties should have a heart-to-heart relationship. The man didn't speak, just nodded, and after a pause, he raised his head and said, "Actually, according to the rules, you should die and they live, but I saved you, so you should repay me, but it doesn't matter what you do, because I also have a purpose for saving you, you need to do something for me thing." While the man's eyes blinked, his hands slowly spread out. In his hand was a photo, not too big, but not too small. It looks like that photo should be the key to our cooperation. Roy frowned. Although he also understood that this man saved himself out of purpose. But it can be regarded as half a friend, anyway, there is an old saying that is good. With many friends and multiple paths, it is impossible for me to make him my enemy. After all, I need friends on the Dark Continent. As long as it does not affect the core interests of the 770, then no matter what happens, it is not a matter, this is inevitable. Yes, the person in the photo has been fighting with me for the rights to this city. You have to know that there is only one person who can control the rights of the city, and that is the city owner. Speaking of the man in the photo, his tone suddenly became a little colder, and at the same time, he clenched his fists more and more tightly, and the photo was crumpled by him. Since ancient times, power struggles have always been bloody, and people will die. I'm not interested in your so-called power targeting me, but I can probably understand what you mean, that is, let me kill him, and I have no objection to that. To put it bluntly, from the moment he saved himself, it was to make himself a murder tool. Roy is not a fool, he probably guessed it from the beginning, but he didn't expect it so soon. But that's okay. If you don't have the value of using it, that is the most terrible thing. At least you still have the value of using it now, so the situation is not so complicated. You are very smart. I appreciate you very much. I believe our cooperation will be perfect. The man grinned. Why didn't he expect this young man to be so smart? Being smart is a good thing, not being smart is a headache. Because only smart people know what they want, what to do, what not to do, what to say and what not to say. There is no need to be so troublesome with each other, and stupid people often don't think so, because stupid people are greedy. That's fine, then wish us a happy cooperation. Roy smiled. Because he is too aware of his current situation, he must gain a firm foothold now. If he cannot gain a firm foothold, then what awaits him will not be disappointment. Want to live? Simply relying on yourself is impossible. The man raised his eyebrows and continued. I have one more question, do you have anything else to ask? The man's vigilance has not changed at all. It is not a bad thing for him to be vigilant. After all, the current situation is very complicated. Although this guy is said to be a foreigner, there is no guarantee that he is a bad person. Actually, I just have one question. If you lose in this competition, what should I do? Roy sighed. He knew very well in his heart that he was already on the sidelines. For him, if he said he was on this side and failed at that time, he would pay a heavy price. What's more, he is just an outsider. An outsider who has not gained a foothold has nothing to do with him. He has no background and no rights. Strength alone is not enough. The man nodded when he heard this, but then laughed again because he was relieved. At least this guy won't betray him. What he is most afraid of is that others will betray him, and that will really pay a heavy price. What's more, many things are not expected or under control, and most of the time it is completely dependent on luck. Most of the time, it depends entirely on whether or not fate can come to fruition. That is the fateful ending. Don't worry. I have prepared a retreat for myself, and of course I will not forget your retreat, so you don't have to worry, you will be affected if you fail. The man is very clear that cooperation means that everyone is honest with each other. Only when everyone is honest with each other can this cooperation continue. Otherwise, this cooperation will be torn apart because of everyone's mutual mistrust and mutual suspicion. At that time, everyone will die, and it will be troublesome at that time. If that's the case, let me find a training ground. I haven't done it for a long time, and I'm a little rusty. Roy sighed. He had to adapt to his own ability, the full ability of the shaking fruit. The man nodded and stood up. Don't worry, I will arrange it for you. After speaking, the man turned around and left, and soon a person came to Roy and said that he had arranged a training ground for him, and let him be responsible for training and cultivation. Roy came to his exclusive training ground. What he has to do today is to improve his ability of shaking fruit again. Shockwave. Roy pressed his hands to the ground, and then sent out a powerful vibration, which quickly spread to the surroundings, and caused the entire space to tremble violently. Sheesh. Shock wave? No way. Someone can use shockwave? When seeing the shock released by Roy, several other players in the training ground all showed surprised expressions. These players include Kane Stewart and his partner Barton, who just played against Roy, as well as Roy's compatriot, Abigail Charlotte Drake. The shock released by Roy has reached the first level, but he still has not restrained his momentum. He raised his hands above his head and let out an angry growl, "Stop." Accompanied by Roy's words, the shock that was about to disappear gathered together again, forming a more violent shock that even directly knocked off part of the floor tiles of the training ground. It's amazing, he can control his own vibrations. Could it be that his ability is really the kind that can control vibrations? No, if you just manipulate the vibration, it shouldn't be enough to cause such a terrifying power. Maybe he wants to use this method to make his vibration frequency higher? I remember Roy's favorite move is Jun Fist. Hearing the discussion of the partner next to him, Roy stood up with a smile. Although his shock wave really uses the frequency of the shock to increase the power of the attack, but Roy never thought of relying on this trick to win. Roy retracted the shock into his body, then took a deep breath, then he raised his foot and stepped forward, and then Roy felt a slight pain in his left shoulder, which made Roy's eyebrows wrinkle, and his face showed there was a trace of doubt. Roy knew very well that this was definitely not a feeling of being beaten or hurt, because he didn't feel any at all. It's as if suddenly bumped into something and was bounced off. This feeling. Could it be that? A picture suddenly flashed in Roy's mind. That was a story he had overheard others talking about before he crossed over. Do you know? Some people saw that on a certain night, someone died inexplicably on the square in the center of the city. Is it true or not? Why have I never heard of this? I saw it with my own eyes. That guy was sitting on the side of the road waiting for my friend, but at a certain moment, his neck broke and he fell into a pool of blood. This is too weird. Did he meet a ghost? Who knows? Anyway, I haven't heard of it, but this person's body is placed on the square, so we can't leave it alone. I called the police, but they said that this person died suddenly, without any signs. How can I believe this? Forget it. Let's not discuss this issue. If we are caught, it will be a miserable end. At this time, the images that flashed in Roy's brain were exactly the arguments he heard before crossing. This is a very old block. The shops on both sides of the street have long been dilapidated, and at the end of the street, there is a large sculpture. This sculpture looks like a towering giant tree, and it is also the only surviving creature in this world. It looks like a woman with a delicate face and beautiful long golden hair. Roy walked to the sculpture and observed it carefully for a while. This sculpture did not seem to be an ordinary puppet, and it exuded a faint fluorescent light all over. Could this be? Roy suddenly thought of something, so he stretched out his right hand and touched the sculpture. The moment Roy's hand touched the sculpture, a dazzling white light suddenly burst out from the whole sculpture. Roy felt as if he was in a warm white light, and there were bursts of birdsong faintly in his ears with the sound. His body also began to levitate involuntarily. After this state lasted for about half a minute, Roy finally regained his senses. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in another place. This place seems to be a church, and Roy's goal is the cross standing in the center of the church. Roy was a little surprised to find that his body was floating in midair. He hurriedly turned his head to look around, only to find that he was standing on the platform outside the church, and on this platform, except for him, there is also a group of people pointing around the cross. And their targets were obviously staring at the piece of ground where Roy was. Roy followed their gazes and found that there was a pothole on the ground. This is. Roy watched the soles of his feet sink into the ground, and then sank little by little. He tried to pull his right leg away, but he couldn't do it at all. This pothole seemed to contain some kind of strong suction, and even Roy couldn't break free. Roy propped his arms on the ground unwillingly, desperately trying to pull his body out. But he found that he couldn't do it, and his body was still slowly sinking down the pothole. This place is unusual, dangerous, and has a very dangerous atmosphere. He must leave quickly. Roy felt a desire to survive, and this desire drove Roy to shout desperately, but no one paid attention to him. Roy could only keep moving towards the bottom of the pothole. He wanted to escape from this dangerous place, but his body couldn't get rid of the attraction of the ground. In this way, Roy's body was finally completely sucked in when the pothole was still about 1 meter away from the ground. Puff. Roy fell into a dark pit. When he fell to the ground, he immediately found that his body became extremely light, as if his body had completely turned into feathers. This strange feeling made him a little confused, not knowing what was going on. However, Roy did not relax because of this, he knew it was just an illusion. Roy got up quickly, looked around and found himself in a room similar to a prison cell. It seems that I got into trouble this time, and it's not a trivial matter. You guys regret that you shouldn't walk around casually, let alone break in casually. Who knows what this place is there any danger here? Who are you? You dare to break into my territory without authorization, you simply don't want to live. Before Roy could react, he saw a big man holding an axe and rushing towards him angrily. Roy didn't dare to hesitate at all, and directly used the power of the shocking fruit to punch the opponent back a few meters away. He became profusely sweating but nothing happened, he just looked down at his chest, then raised his head and looked at Roy angrily, and then he leapt and slashed at Roy head on with the axe in his hand. This big man obviously knew the power of the shaking fruit, so he used all his strength as soon as he came up, and the axe made bursts of sonic booms as it waved in the air, full of power. Boy. Go to hell with me. Feeling the strong wind from the opponent's attack, Roy narrowed his eyes slightly, and as his thoughts turned, an invisible barrier instantly appeared, and at the same time, his body was also prepared for defense. Ding. The axe slashed on the invisible barrier, making a sound like metal clashing. Although he blocked an attack from the opponent, Roy was still shocked and took a few steps backwards before barely gaining a foothold. Roy was surprised to find that the ability of his shaking fruit had reached the peak of the second level, and he was only short of being able to upgrade to the third level. Damn it. The big man cursed secretly, he didn't expect the opponent to be able to resist his full blow. With the blow just now, even an ordinary person would be chopped into 2 pieces, let alone a thin and weak boy. HMPH. If that's the case, then I will personally send you on your way. With a sneer, the big man swung his axe again and rushed towards Roy. This time his speed was even faster, the minister-shaped axe in his hand even pulled out afterimages in the air. However, clang, there was another crisp metal crashing sound. The big man's axe was blocked before it touched Roy, and his body even took 2 steps back due to inertia before barely stopping. How is it possible? The big man exclaimed in disbelief. The blow just now had clearly reached the level of the peak of the second order, and it also had the effect of a nirvana. It stands to reason that he should be able to easily chop this thin young man under the axe, but the opponent relied on a strange armor and a pair of strange gloves to resist his attack, and forced himself to retreat continuously. You know, he is a master with armed domineering awe. And the other party is only about 15 years old, 2 heads shorter than him, but his combat power surpasses that of himself, a master? As expected of a person from the Dark Continent, their strength should not be underestimated. Roy secretly admired in his heart. Even he felt very strenuous with the opponent's fierce move just now. If he hadn't relied on his own armor to protect his body in time, he would have been split in 2 long ago. However, this big man is not as simple as he appears on the surface. Although it was only a brief confrontation, judging from the angle and strength of each attack of the opponent is definitely a seasoned warrior, and he also possesses some kind of powerful weapon. Swordsmanship. Roy believed that this guy must be a swordsman, and a very powerful swordsman at that. However, although this guy had some skills, Roy didn't pay attention to it at all. The opponent's swordsmanship was indeed very strong, but after seeing Khalifa's swordsmanship, this level of swordsmanship was completely childish to Roy. After all, Khalifa is a master of swordsmanship, so how could the disciples she taught be mediocre? It seems that your strength is nothing more than that. A playful arc was drawn at the corner of Roy's mouth, and he stretched out his hand to grab it forward. There was only a muffled sound, and the big man's body suddenly flew out and fell to the ground. Ahem. You. Who the hell are you? The big man struggled to get up, coughing, and asked with a guarded face. Who am I? Hee. Roy sneered. You'll find out soon. Swish. As soon as the voice fell, Roy's figure turned into a phantom and disappeared in place. Next moment. Puff, the sound of sharp blades cutting through flesh and blood came, and the big man widened his eyes, lowered his head and looked at the sharp claws piercing out of his chest in disbelief. You are. What? The big man twisted his neck with difficulty, looked at Roy beside him and asked. But he was answered by silence. Bang! Roy withdrew his sharp claws, and the big man fell heavily to the ground, his life slowly disappearing. Roy ignored the big man's body, but walked over to pick up the dropped axe. The shape of this axe is very peculiar. The handle is jagged, but the blade is curved. The most important thing is that this axe is covered with sharp iron thorns. Once injured by this axe, unless you hide behind a shield otherwise, it will definitely not feel good, and there is a palm-sized stone slab hanging on the end of the handle of the axe, which looks very simple. Roy tentatively injected a bit of the power of the shaking fruit into the axe, and then a scene that surprised him appeared. When Roy's shaking fruit ability was input into the axe, the space around the axe seemed to fluctuate slightly, and then Roy saw a picture appear in his mind. In the picture, it is a dark and damp cave, which is filled with a decaying atmosphere. There is a very huge altar, and there are many skeletons on the altar. There are 8 men and women. Roy was dumbfounded. This feeling seemed to have been seen before. But he couldn't be sure that his brain nerves seemed to be manipulated by someone. But no matter what, he couldn't stay in this place anymore. He had to leave this place quickly, because this place was not an ordinary place. If he continued to stay, Roy might not encounter any trouble. But it was too late. I saw a few men, 077, in black robes approaching him. Before Roy could see clearly, and wanted to make sure, suddenly the 2 men on the left and right disappeared, and only the man in the black robe in the middle of the mountain attacked him with an iron sword in his hand. Roy frowned and knew that he was in trouble. It seemed that there was no way to solve this matter without going through a few fierce battles. But he wasn't flustered, facing the opponent's sharp attack. Roy didn't panic at all. He awakened the Junjun fruit, and now he is not afraid of any enemies. When the iron sword in the hand of the man in the black robe was about to touch Roy, Roy just shook his body, and Fang Sha retreated. But the man in the black robe was unwilling to attack him again with the black iron sword in his hand. The speed is as fast as a ghost, and it has a biting killing intent. Roy frowned, and punched out with the power of the shaking fruit. Suddenly, there was a violent fluctuating sound in the air. Roy's punch was so powerful that he sent the opponent flying several meters away. However, Roy was not relieved, because the man who was beaten by him quickly stood up and rushed towards him with a murderous look on his face. From the looks of it, the attack just now didn't hurt him, and it can even be said that it wasn't even a minor injury. Tricky. Roy thought to himself. Although he has already activated the fruit ability, he still needs to adapt to this ability. However, Roy also understood that the situation in front of him could no longer allow him to think too much about things. Since it is unavoidable, let's fight. Roy made a wrong step, dodged the stabbing sword from the opponent, then grabbed his shoulder with his backhand and fell to the ground forcefully. Immediately, the man flew upside down, hit the wall heavily, and slid to the floor again. Cough. The man couldn't help spitting out a mouthful of blood foam, then took out a pill from his arms and put it in his mouth. You. Damn. Roy snorted coldly. Hee, is it? I want to see who will die first. After finishing speaking, he bullied himself and attacked the opponent. Boom boom boom. The two wrestled together for an instant. As the fight continued, Roy felt more and more strenuous. Although he has activated the fruit ability and has a strong physique, the opponent is obviously better at close combat and fighting skills than him. Moreover, he also took the elixir to increase his physique and restore his strength, so the gap between the two sides is gradually narrowing. Roy's brow was dripping with sweat, he clenched his teeth and punched hard. Suddenly, Roy heard a crisp sound of tea coming from his ear. He turned his head and saw that the person who was fighting fiercely with him suddenly disappeared. Huh. What's going on? Roy was stunned. However, at this time he suddenly felt a huge sense of crisis. After a muffled sound of bang, Roy flew upside down and smashed hard against the wall. Puff. Blood gushed out. Roy looked up and saw a man wrapped in a black robe, slowly withdrawing his right hand. Damn it. How dare you sneak up on me? Roy growled through gritted teeth. The man said with a sinister smile, didn't you already know? What do you mean? Roy wondered. The man said, my goal is. Before he finished speaking, he suddenly rushed towards Roy. His figure is extremely elegant, like a ghost, it is almost difficult to catch traces. Roy hurriedly used the ability of the shaking fruit, but to Roy's surprise, he was unable to lock the opponent's position. Just when he was in a daze, felt a sharp pain in his chest. Roy looked down and found a deep wound on his chest by the opponent's weapon. Blood spurted. Asshole. Roy cursed angrily, quickly pulled out the dagger stuck in his waist, and then slashed at the opponent. Clang. The dagger was blocked by the opponent. At the same time, Roy felt a kick from the opponent, kicked him directly in the abdomen, and kicked himself 5 or 6 meters away. Cough cough. The severe pain made Roy retch, but he didn't stop fighting back. Roy struggled to get up, and continued to walk towards the opponent with the dagger in hand. However, at this moment, Roy suddenly saw a familiar face. That face was that of the man he had fought with just now. At this moment, the man was looking down at him, with a playful light in his eyes. You. A chill rose in Roy's heart. You. He trembled and pointed at the other party speechless. Ha ha ha. The man smiled wildly, and said word by word, "My name is Hiromika, and I am a big shot in the Dark Organization. I came here to take your life today." Hiromika? The Order of Hiromika? Those unfamiliar words flickered in Roy's head. He didn't remember that he had ever provoked such a powerful existence. "Who are you?" Roy asked through gritted teeth. Hiromika grinned and said, "Hee hee, you don't need to know. As long as you know, you're going to die soon." Hearing this, Roy's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly remembered that he seemed to have mentioned the name of the Dark Organization. It is said that the Dark Organization specifically targets people like him with Devil Fruit abilities. Anyone with the Devil Fruit ability, as long as they are targeted by the Dark Organization, basically cannot escape the end of death. Roy thought to himself, "Oops. I'm afraid it will be a big trouble this time." However, now he has no way out. Roy took a deep breath, then raised his dagger, bracing for the worst. He can only gamble now, hoping that he can successfully take it off. "Go to hell." Black Romika shouted loudly and rushed over again. Roy also went forward without hesitation. Bang, bang, bang. For a while, the two continued to clash, punching and kicking together, sparks splashing, and strong wind howling. Roy was constantly forced to retreat by Black Romika. There is no way, he can only use the full ability of the shaking fruit. After knocking the opponent into the air with one punch, he quickly shifted his place, because he knew that he couldn't continue fighting with these guys, and these guys would still have helpers. "I am alone without any help. If you continue to fight with them, you will definitely be the one who suffers at that time, which is understandable, because the opponent's strength is very strong. What's more, the other party is still an organization. This is the Dark Continent, and the organization here is not simple." After fleeing all the way, he finally returned to the familiar street in the familiar villa. "Until you walk into the villa and go back to the room." Roy breathed a sigh of relief. He made up his mind. "I can no longer go out casually, because I don't know what kind of trouble I will cause. This is the Dark Continent, so it is better not to make trouble as much as possible. After all, there is only one person. If all the partners are there, then there is nothing to worry about. And now I have been targeted in this situation. After all, I don't belong to the Dark Continent, but come from another place. The people on the Dark Continent are all very powerful." When Roy was thinking about how to become stronger, suddenly there was chaos outside. He opened the window and looked outside. It turned out to be a group of ants. These ants are slaughtering human beings in every corner of the street, and they pack up all living human beings. This had to remind him of Chimera. That thing is very powerful. It is a very strong creature with very special abilities, and their army of ants has to be said. But this is somewhat different from the original. After all, these guys in the original book only dared to fight in the village, not in the city. But now these guys are attacking the city openly. Burning, killing, and looting in the city is still unexpected, and this is not very different from the original. Looking at the people and ordinary people running for their lives on the street, Roy originally wanted to help, but after thinking about it, he decided not to go, because he was afraid of getting into trouble. For him, now he has to be wise and protect himself, and he can't stand out. After all, he still has lingering fears in his heart after being hunted down by that so-called shitty Dark Organization just now. After completing the transaction with that man honestly, get the reward you deserve, and then leave this ghost place, because this place is really not for people. The villagers here are very simple. But there is a problem. There are all kinds of troubles and threats here, all kinds of organizations and gangs, which he did not expect these so-called organizations and gangs. It is also more troublesome and not easy to deal with. Roy lay on the bed and didn't look out the window, but the trouble found him. Roy originally planned to stay in the room and ignore the ant creatures on the street, because those ant creatures are now in human form, and they are burning, killing and looting everywhere. Know that these humanoid ants are creatures known as a chimera. It is one of the disasters on the Dark Continent. It's better not to provoke them yourself. But Roy never expected that these humanoid ants would take the initiative to provoke him. Soon his room was surrounded by humanoid ants. Roy didn't dare to have the slightest hesitation, and directly used the shaking fruit ability, smashing countless ants. But the humanoid ants are numerous. Roy felt that his arm was bitten by a humanoid ant, and suddenly there was a huge pain. Then Roy slammed it hard, and it flew tens of meters away, and the wolf was on the ground. Roy noticed that the humanoid ants had turned red. Damn it. Roy cursed. The viruses in the bodies of these humanoid ants can spread through free water molecules in the air. That's why Roy returned in such pain. His skin and blood were infected. Roy endured the severe pain, his eyes were red, and he roared angrily. Residents across the block heard Roy's roar. Then a gust of wind spurted out from his mouth. Those humanoid ants were blown away and even crashed into other houses. But something even more surprising happened. After those humanoid ants were blown away by Roy, they crawled back again. Their mouthparts were wide open, revealing ferocious teeth, and their eyes became scarlet. They didn't seem to be afraid of the strong wind, and rushed towards Roy again. Roy's face was extremely ugly, and he couldn't figure out why these humanoid ants were so unafraid of death. Suddenly, he remembered that humanoid ants are the source of plague on the Dark Continent. And these guys are not interested in anything, but like to eat any life. So that's it, it's really cruel. After Roy figured it out, he was relieved in his heart. He finally found a solution to the problem, but he had to clean up the humanoid ants around his body first. Roy waved his fist and kept hitting the humanoid ants around him. With every attack of Roy, many humanoid ants will be killed. But those human-shaped ants seemed to be tireless, advancing one after another. Finally, after Roy blasted and killed nearly 100 humanoid ants, he finally eliminated the danger around him. Whoa, whoa. Roy was lying on the ground gasping for breath, sweating profusely, and his clothes were already soaked. The short battle just now exhausted him a lot. Not only that, but there are also serious internal injuries inside the body. This is the most difficult battle he has encountered since crossing. Huh. Is there someone? When Roy recovered a bit, he found that many pedestrians on the street ran away in a hurry. What happened? Roy wondered. But now he didn't care too much. He immediately stood up and ran to the center of the city. He wanted to find out what happened. In the center of this ancient city is a tall tower called the Royal Palace. The people here are basically nobles, or men with titles. Their families all enjoy the glory and wealth in the palace. There is a vast square in the center of the palace, which is usually patrolled by soldiers. But today there are no soldiers in the square, only a large number of residents, who are jumping in all directions. This square is piled up by boulders, very strong enough to withstand ordinary artillery attacks. But today, on the square, a group of humanoid monsters appeared. These humanoid monsters have 2 legs and 1 head. There is a huge tail growing from the back, and a small scorpion is dragging at the end of the tail. These monsters are humanoid ants. Their speed is astonishingly fast, and they rushed into the crowd of residents in the blink of an eye. There was a burst of wailing and screaming. Before some residents could even figure out what was going on, they were torn apart by humanoid ants. The speed of the humanoid ants is too fast. Even Roy couldn't keep up. He could only watch helplessly as these humanoid ants slaughtered the residents around him. Although these human residents have the strength of armed knights, they are still no match for these humanoid ants. Because these ants have strong defense and strong lethality. Soon, thousands of people died at the hands of humanoid ants. Bastard! Roy yelled angrily, "You bloody humanoid ants, I'm going to kill you all." He raised the glove in his hand and rushed towards the humanoid ants. But the speed of those humanoid ants is really too fast. Their movements are flexible and their ability to dodge is extremely strong. Easily dodged Roy's attack. Roy was so angry that he yelled crazily, "Get out of here! Get out of here!" Roy kept hitting these humanoid ants with his fists. But the defense of these humanoid ants is very tenacious, and Roy's attack can only cause a little bit of minor injury. Roy's movement attracted the attention of these humanoid ants, and they diverted their attention one after another, rushing towards Roy. "Oh my God! Help me!" Roy was so frightened that he froze and ran away in another direction. But those humanoid ants obviously spotted Roy and chased after him. It won't work like this. Roy's body is getting weaker and weaker. His current physique can only last 5 or 6 minutes of fighting. If these humanoid ants don't give up, he must be caught. Suddenly, Roy saw a door ahead. Without further ado, Roy pushed the door open and entered. It was found that the room was also full of humanoid ants. He directly used the ability of shaking fruit to smash all these humanoid ants. But Roy found that these humanoid ants did not die because of this. The fighting ability of these humanoid ants is too terrifying. Roy frowned. Even Roy, the ability to use the shaking fruit, is absolutely unable to fight against these humanoid ants. However, the weakness of these humanoid ants should be their carapaces. As long as those carapaces are broken, these humanoid ants will be finished. Just how to break the carapace of the humanoid ant? When Roy was thinking, he suddenly found some humanoid ants approaching him. "Ha!" Roy yelled loudly, and kicked the humanoid ant that was close to him, and at the same time, his body quickly jumped away and hid in the corner. At this time, those humanoid ants were already approaching. They stretched out their sharp claws and pierced into the armor on Roy's body. Hiss! Roy gasped. The attack of these claws was so fierce that it almost tore the armor on his body. Roy hurriedly mobilized the remaining energy in his body to wrap the armor on his body. Then use all your strength to overturn these humanoid ants to the ground. Peeved. At this moment, his chest was stabbed by a humanoid ant. Ah! Roy screamed. The position of this humanoid ant's stabbing was very ingenious, directly piercing into Roy's flesh and blood, absorbing his blood. No, blood can speed up their reproduction. Roy's face changed drastically. He knew that the target of these humanoid ants was not him, but his blood. If these humanoid ants are full of blood, they can eat without restraint until they gnaw Roy until there is no bone left. You can't sit still. With a thought, Roy pulled out the blade on his arm. Suddenly, water sprayed out. Roy inserted the blade into his arm and stirred vigorously, trying to cut off the parasitic lines of those humanoid ants. Crack, click, click. There was friction between the blade and the humanoid ant. The blade was constantly wearing and tearing, and finally cut off the parasitic threads of those humanoid ants. Roy clutched his wound painfully. His body began to change, and the armor on his body quickly faded. Then a strange energy burst out of his body. This energy has a very powerful healing ability, and it repaired all the wounds on Roy's body in an instant, making him heal. The blood on Roy's body also disappeared without a trace, as if he had never been injured. Roy's eyes turned into golden vertical pupils, and light green flames burned day by day. Now he's a brand new Hunter x Hunter. Roar! Just as Roy had just recovered, another humanoid ant rushed towards Roy. Roy clenched his fist with his right hand and slammed it out, smashing the head of the humanoid ant. At the same time, the humanoid ants beside Roy also attacked him. Roy's eyes glowed red, and his movements became faster. His speed was several times faster than before, which made him feel full of strength. Boom! Roy punched a humanoid ant in the head. The humanoid ant fell to the ground and died. But after that, other humanoid ants will attack again. There were scars on Roy's body, but whenever he showed signs of fatigue, the humanoid ants would stop attacking. Because, according to the rules of this world, the strong live and the weak die. Damn it! Why did I touch these things? Roy cursed, then took out the dagger and slashed himself. Hiss! Roy couldn't help crying out in pain, and the wound on his body gushed out a lot of blood again. Roy gritted his teeth, enduring the severe pain from the wound. Then, his lips trembled, and he spit out a black ball. Roy's blood dripped on the black ball along the dagger, and the black ball began to swell, and then turned into a sinkhole. Roy jumped into the big pit, and his whole body got into the pit. Boom! The big pit exploded, and a huge mushroom cloud rose up. After the smoke and dust dissipated, a huge cave with a depth of more than 2 meters was left on the ground. Roy lay there, motionless. After a while, Roy slowly got up. Roy's wounds had already healed. Cough, cough, cough. Roy gently patted the dirt on his body. It seems that my guess is right. My blood can indeed put these monsters to sleep, Roy murmured. After Roy figured out the key points, he started to walk outside. Roy didn't dare to stay here any longer. He was afraid that his blood would wake up these monsters and swallow him up. Be careful. Suddenly, Roy heard a sharp hiss. Roy squatted down hastily. A humanoid ant swooped down from the sky. Boom! Roy was hit on the shoulder, and he flew backwards. Roy fell to the ground, then quickly got up and left the forehead. Shish! Roy's figure shuttled across the roof. Boom! Boom! Roy's speed is getting faster and faster, and finally even formed a sun phantom. His figure appeared on the roof of a building like a ghost. He saw a humanoid ant with a green shell. And the humanoid ant found him, growled in its mouth, and then rushed towards him very quickly. The opponent was so fast that only 10 afterimages could be seen in the air. Roy frowned. At this moment, a voice sounded in my mind. The Whitebeard panel and the Hunter x Hunter panel are bound to each other. An attribute panel appeared before his eyes 0.0 in the next second. Looking around is a Hunter panel. His strength, speed and intelligence have changed from the original 100 to 200. The two templates are fused together. He gets an upgrade again. The most outrageous thing is that the level of his Hunter panel has actually reached level 120. This upgrade speed is too fast, but there is no special Hunter ability for the time being. The only ones that can be used are Whitebeard's vibrating fruit. This is a good thing for Roy, because he has improved a lot now. So now he has nothing to fear when facing those humanoid ants. As a Hunter x Hunter, he also has his first mission. Roy, who is now Hunter x Hunter, knows that these humanoid ants are one of the disasters of the Dark Continent. Now these human ants are invading the city, and his first mission as Hunter x Hunter is to exterminate all these human ants. After all, his devil fruit shock fruit has been upgraded. Roy looked at the ants in front of him, thinking in his heart that he would blow them up with his fist. Roar. Accompanied by his angry shout, the ground trembled violently, and countless gravels flew out from all around, smashing towards the group of humanoid ants. But a strange thing happened. I saw that those humanoid ants were not in a hurry, and a red light appeared on their bodies, blocking the attack of those gravels. It's kind of interesting. The corners of Roy's mouth curled up slightly. Although he has not fought against ants for a long time, he still remembers the way of fighting in the past, and also remembers the weaknesses of ants. But these humanoid ants in front of them are obviously more powerful than before, and even those hard rock steps are strong enough to resist. This situation made him very excited. He wanted to torture and kill these guys, let them know the consequences of provoking Hunter x Hunter. Boom. He rushed towards one of the group of humanoid ants again. Boom, boom, boom. After a burst of collision, those humanoid ants were beaten back by Roy, and even the red light emitted from them disappeared. Haha, that's right, otherwise, how could you die? Roy laughed out loud. His shaking fruit is so powerful that it only needs to touch a slight enemy, and it is enough to wipe out the enemy in ashes. But these humanoid ants were able to withstand the damage of the shocking fruit, which surprised Roy very much. Could it be that the defense of these things has become stronger? Roy even guessed in his heart. At this time, Roy suddenly felt that there were a few more figures around him. Turning his head to look, Roy took a deep breath, because these figures look exactly like humans. Human-shaped ants? This is impossible. He couldn't help but think of his previous combat experience. Back then, humanoid ants were rampant, towns all over the Dark Continent were attacked, and human beings were slaughtered. But all this is not the end, it is just the beginning. Humanoid ants rely on devouring human flesh and blood to grow, and when they mature, they will reveal their real bodies. And at this moment, their power has reached its peak. At this time, it only needs to lightly touch the human skin to turn them into ashes, and humanoid ants are not afraid of flames. Their intelligence is very high, they know how to distinguish human weapons, and at the same time they have extremely fast speed. Most importantly, they can use venom. Even the strongest among humans can only temporarily avoid the edge when encountering these humanoid ants. Roy even fought against a group of humanoid ants himself, and he fled in the end. And that time, his two teammates all died, and he was the only one who survived. But how to explain the 3 humanoid ants that appeared in front of them? Could it be that the reproductive capacity of humanoid ants has suddenly increased? No, impossible. It seems that the queen ants should be constantly evolving and devouring humans. This is simply unscientific. Unless their strength breaks through to a certain stage, it is possible to produce this kind of mutation. However, these humanoid ants are just ordinary ants, and it is absolutely impossible for them to surpass humans in strength. Roy stared at the 3 humanoid ants vigilantly, but before he could ask, the 3 humanoid ants moved in an instant. 3 red lights flashed and shot directly at Roy. HMPH. Courting death. Roy snorted coldly, waved his fists and blasted at the 3 red lights. Bang bang bang. The fist collided with the red light, and a gust of wind spread out. Roy felt pain in his arm, and he quickly withdrew his fist. And the 3 humanoid ants seemed to have sensed Roy's strength, and immediately stopped their attack. The 3 gathered together, staring at Roy nervously, as if looking for an opportunity to give Roy a fatal blow. But Roy's reaction was too fast. These humanoid ants couldn't find a chance at all. That's right, it's Hunter x Hunter, I like it. Roy grinned 10 times. Before he finished speaking, the 3 humanoid ants moved. The 3 of them jumped up at the same time and stabbed Royce with their sharp swords. Roy frowned. The 3 humanoid ants cooperated so well that he couldn't find a chance to fight back. However, Roy is not worried at all, because he knows who he is Hunter x Hunter. No matter what kind of enemy he is facing, he can always win. Boom. Roy even put his foot on the ground, and the whole mountain shook his dick. In the next second, he rose into the air. Boom, in midair, Roy waved his hands and threw rocks at the 3 humanoid ants. Poochie. Puff. Puff. Roy's throwing skills were very precise, and the 3 humanoid ants couldn't dodge in time, and were hit by his attack, blood spattered all over the ground. Roar. One of the humanoid ants roared up to the sky, and its body instantly swelled up, and its hair stood on end. The same is true for the other 2 humanoid ants, and their bodies are glowing red. As this evolution? Roy's eyes lit up, and he saw the transformation of 3 humanoid ants. Their bodies continued to grow, and finally turned into 5-meter-high and 10-meter-thick behemoths, standing like hills in the forest. This power. Roy's face was serious. The strength of these 3 humanoid ants was probably close to that of a gold-ranked powerhouse. This was a crushing gap. As for Roy, his strength is only at the silver level, and he simply cannot match such an existence. Who? Suddenly, a stench came over his nostrils, and Roy's face changed drastically. He hurriedly dodged a long tail whip. Crack. Slap. The tail swept the ground fiercely, piercing through the ground immediately, filling the sky. Hu Kai. Immediately afterwards, a burst of red light shot straight at Roy's throat. Not good. Roy yelled, and he hastily dodged sideways, narrowly avoiding the red light, and on his right shoulder, a tear was cut in his clothes, dripping with blood. Hiss. Just when Roy was still standing still, a red light shot out again, rubbing against his head and passing by. I have to say that it was really dangerous, almost gone, and the other party was simply terrifying. If he was a step slower, Roy might even be split in half. The speed of these humanoid ants was terrifying, and Roy couldn't even catch their tracks, so he could only be beaten passively, which put him in a dangerous situation. However, Roy's physical fitness is very strong. Every time when humanoid ants attack, Roy can always make a correct judgment. Although he is not sure about the strength of these humanoid ants, Roy believes that he can still hold on for a while. Although these 3 humanoid ants are powerful, they seem to lack a soul. Roy muttered to himself. Monsters of this level have no souls, which means that these monsters are just ordinary beasts. A monster of this level is simply vulnerable to humans. In that case, then, there was a cruel smile on the corner of Roy's mouth. Let's use you guys to practice knives. A layer of lavender shield appeared on Roy's arm, which is the effect of attribute power, which can resist all physical attacks, and this is also a shield that is immune to magic effects. Afterwards, Roy even raised the double blades in his hands, and slashed at the neck of a humanoid ant. Clang. A crisp impact sounded, and Roy's knife slashed on the neck of the humanoid ant. Roy could only feel a severe numbness coming from the tiger's mouth. He couldn't help shaking his hands, and was surprised. The teeth are so hard, they are harder than the ironclad lizard. Roar. Roy's attack obviously angered these humanoid ants. Several humanoid ants rushed to bite Roy. Roy sneered disdainfully, and slashed at the head of the humanoid ant again. Clang, sparks fly. People and ants survive without damage. Hoo-hoo. More humanoid ants rushed over. Roll. Roy yelled violently. The muscles in his arms tensed, his veins swelled, and he exploded with great force, knocking back the humanoid ants that surrounded him, and then took the opportunity to leave the battle. He turned around and found that there was only 1 humanoid ant left among the original 3 humanoid ants. Hee hee. Roy sneered. His target was not the humanoid ant, but the 2 companions. The 2 companions had already lost their minds. Seeing their companions being killed, they frantically ran towards the body of the humanoid ant, scrambling for the corpses of their companions. Whoosh. Roy's figure disappeared instantly. He appeared behind 2 humanoid ants, and swept across with his double blades, cutting across from left to right. Boom. Accompanied by a muffled sound, the heads of the 2 humanoid ants were cut off on the spot, and their bodies also fell to the ground. Ding dong, you have gained 10 experience points. Ding, you have gained 20 experience points. The system prompt sounded again. Excitement appeared on Roy's face. He had killed 3 humanoid ants just now and obtained 130 experience points respectively. The level of these 3 humanoid ants is much higher than mine, but with my strength and this equipment, I can definitely defeat them. Roy even shook the weapon in his hand. Confidence doubled. His strength, defense and agility have reached the silver stage. Even 3 humanoid ants of the same level can't help him. Roy took a deep breath and walked slowly to the corpses of the 3 humanoid ants. The mutation of these ants is too fast. They are constantly evolving, and they are constantly becoming stronger. He inserted his double blades into the ground, twisted it suddenly, and only heard a click. The ground suddenly cracked, and then a dagger was pulled out from the crack and fell into Roy's hands. This dagger. Could it be the rumored dark poison sword? Roy even narrowed his eyes, showing a look of surprise and uncertainty. Dark poison sword. This thing is said to be very destructive to carbon-based creatures. As long as it's carbon-based, it will not be afraid. This dagger has an extremely strong corrosive effect. As long as it is contaminated with damage, it will cause a corrosive effect. Unless it is treated with special medicine, it will surely die. Roy held the dark poisonous sword in his hand, narrowed his eyes slightly, and carefully observed the structure of the dagger, trying to find its flaws. Suddenly, Roy even noticed that there was an ancient pattern engraved on the hilt of the dark poison sword. There were bursts of black mist in the pattern, which looked like the skeleton of some kind of creature. Roy's heart beat a few beats inexplicably. He remembered some historical records of the Dark Empire. It is said that the owner of this dagger is a demon. Roy swallowed hard, thinking to himself. Could it be that this dagger really belongs to the Dark Empire? Roy's heart was pounding. Although Roy knew that he shouldn't be greedy for this dagger, after all, the Dark Empire once destroyed the whole world. Who knows if the secret treasure of the Dark Empire has any strange power? Returning to Roy's heart is still greedy. Roy's eyes fell on the dark poisonous sword. Its material has not been smelted, so it has no characteristics. Accept it first and then talk. Roy decided to accept the dark poison sword. He stretched out his palm and pressed it on the dagger. The next second, the dagger melted into his palm. Ding dong. Congratulations on getting the dark poison sword. Shua. At the moment when the dark poison sword started, Roy felt the coldness coming from his arm, and he quickly checked his attribute bar. Name. Roy, human. Title. Brave occupation. Hunter x Hunter Swordsman. Level. 3 Spirit plus 4 Constitution plus 2 Lucky plus 1. After reading Roy's attributes, Roy's eyes lit up. He found that his physique and spirit had each increased by 5 points. Now, his physique has become a full 5 points. Moreover, the spirit has also increased by 8 points, which is equivalent to the result of 1 hour of normal training. Ha 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 ha. Roy looked up to the sky and laughed. His physique reached 6 points, which is a very good attribute. Roy was very happy and continued to look for other monsters. In this empty forest, Roy even encountered hundreds of ferocious and bloodthirsty monsters. These monsters are not weak, including high-level beasts and even 2-star beasts. They were all slaughtered by him, and in the end, he gained nearly 1,000 experience points. Not only that, after killing all the monsters, his strength has improved a lot, and now he is already a level 7 thief. Roy didn't even stop, and continued to throw forward. The further he walked, the more he could feel the strong smell of blood. Ho 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 ho. Suddenly, a deafening roar came from afar, making Roy's heart palpitate. Roy immediately stared with bated breath as he spotted a giant ant. The appearance of this ant is slightly different from that of ordinary ants. It has 8 thick legs, each of which is about 4 meters long, with a longer tail and a golden yellow body, like sharp steel needles. People are overwhelmed by fear. While Roy was looking at it, it seemed to be staring Roy. Ho 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 ho. Scarlet bubbles spit out from the giant ant's mouth. It stared at Roy, as if smelling the smell of food, with green eyes shining. The next moment, the giant ant opened its mouth wide, exposing its sharp serrated fangs, and rushed towards Roy Ren. Roy's reaction speed was extremely fast. His footsteps moved slightly, avoided the attack of the giant ant, and at the same time, his fingers curled slightly, stabbing the giant ant violently. Poochie. Roy's fingers were piercing the belly of the giant ant. This is Roy's skill, Broken Spirit. Once it hits an enemy, it will trigger a corrosion effect, which can cause enemies within a radius of 15 yards to suffer 50% corrosion damage and reduce their movement speed by 40%. Although Roy's attributes are not as strong as giant ants, he has the effect of Corrosion Claw, which can reduce the enemy's HP. Brush. A cloud of black liquid was sprayed on the belly of the giant ant, reducing its blood volume by 30%. Immediately afterwards, the effect of the Claw of Corrosion was activated. Chi chi chi. A black brilliance enveloped the giant ant's abdomen. Its originally hard shell was corroded with holes one after another, and blood flowed out. The giant ant screamed and struggled in pain. Roy took the opportunity to draw out the dagger, then turned around suddenly, rushed to the giant ant, swung the dagger, and aimed at the head of the ant. Clang. The giant ant's head was extremely hard. Roy chopped it with a knife, and sparks flew everywhere, but he couldn't cut off the giant ant's head. This guy is so tough. Roy frowned. Roar. The giant ant roared, kicked its 8 legs suddenly, and its huge body flew towards it like a cannonball. Call out. Roy's figure flickered suddenly, avoiding the giant ant's attack, and then he quickly walked around the giant ant's side, brandished the dagger, and stabbed the giant ant's neck fiercely. Boom. Roy's dagger directly pierced the giant ant's throat, bringing up the blood of Daxing. Hiss. The giant ant let out a miserable howl and fell heavily to the ground. Its body trembled violently, as if it was in great pain. It struggled to get up. Roar. The giant ant roared angrily, then rushed towards Roy Shi. Roy's face changed slightly, and he quickly avoided. Boom. The ground exploded, dust flying everywhere. Damn it. Roy cursed with lingering fear. At that moment just now, he was almost killed by the giant ant. Gritting his teeth, he endured it. Damn the system, did I provoke you? Why did such a thing come out? Roy is very aware of the gap between himself and this giant ant. He absolutely cannot resist this giant ant. However, Roy has no way out. He couldn't run, and he didn't dare to escape. If he runs away, he will definitely be hunted down to death by monsters. This dungeon does not allow failure in. Damn. Fight. Roy's eyes were red, he clenched his fists, and while avoiding the giant ant's attack, he rushed towards the giant ant, and at the same time, he took out a black lacquered stone. Dragon Flame Stone. A consumable item. After use, you can release Flame Storm once, lasting for 10 seconds, with a cooling time of 20 minutes. Roy crushed the Dragon Flame Stone without hesitation. Immediately, a gust of wind whizzed past, blowing on the giant ant, and immediately, its moving speed was greatly reduced. Roy seized the opportunity and rushed forward. His dagger was deeply inserted into the head of the giant ant. At the same time, he hit the abdomen of the giant ant with Broken Spirit, cutting off 70% of its blood volume. However, the giant ant's defense is amazing. Even if it is pierced through the head with a dagger, it still has 600,000 horsepower. Roy gritted his teeth, pulled out the dagger, and then, he swung the dagger again. Clang. The dagger hit the giant ant's ribcage, sparks splashed immediately, and Royce used this force to jump 09 to the back of the giant ant. He raised his elbow violently and smashed it heavily on the giant ant's spine. This hammer directly smashed the spine of the giant ant, making it completely lose its combat effectiveness. Ding. Congratulations on successfully killing giant ants, gaining 2,000 experience points and 200 proficiency points. Hearing the system notification tone, Roy was immediately excited. Although killing giant ants only gained 2,000 experience points, the proficiency doubled. Hey. Roy grinned. His proficiency has accumulated more than 500 points. If he kills a few more Lord-level creatures, it is estimated that he can get more than 600 points of proficiency. If you want to advance, you must gather 500 proficiency points. Ding. At this time, the system prompt sounded suddenly. Please pay attention, because you have killed too much. You have already attracted the attention of the devil's soul. It is about to come and lock you. Please leave the devil's cemetery as soon as possible, otherwise, what is waiting for you will be devastating disaster. F*K. When Roy heard this, he was scared to pee on the spot. Demon Soul. The incarnation of the legendary devil, the legendary boss. The soul of the devil is an existence similar to the necromancer. It is the natural enemy of the necromancer, because it can devour the soul of any dead person and make him a necromancer. According to legend, in some worlds, there are even legendary level demons. Your sister of the system. You actually pushed me to the devil. Are you looking at me as a bully? Roy couldn't help but curse. Roy even knew that if he really encountered Demon Soul, he would definitely die. Forget it. Let's settle down if it comes. Roy sighed, resigned to his fate. He knew he couldn't resist, otherwise, he would fall into a nightmare forever, and Roy looked around and found that the surrounding woods had completely changed. There were old and verdant plants, and the dense branches and leaves blocked the moon, making the whole forest look gloomy and gloomy. But in front of Roy's eyes, ugly and ferocious demons appeared. Ah! Roy was dumbfounded. At this moment he hadn't become stronger, and he didn't even have the exclusive skills of Hunter x Hunter. This is a great challenge for him. After all, as a Hunter x Hunter, he must have his own exclusive challenge skills. But the system not only didn't give him exclusive skills, but at the same time, even the fruit didn't break through again. The ability of the fruit is the same as before, which is a trouble for him. Can you stop playing with me like this? This is simply a cannonball attacking mosquitoes. I am that typical mosquito. There are many monsters in the Dark Continent, and they are all terrifying existences. Now that there is such a monster, those humanoid ants are already very difficult to deal with. Now that such a thing has appeared, it is even more difficult to deal with. Roy's first thought was to get away from this monster quickly, because this monster's strength is not weak. Can I become his delicacy? But Roy still has to face the reality. Many things seem to be destined in life. Roy fled all the way. Originally, it had a partner in this place, and this city was very good for him, but it was a pity that he was being targeted. And the ones staring at him are not human creatures, but the most terrifying creatures on this dark continent. Once they mark it, it will be troublesome, so running away is the best choice at this time. Now it is definitely better to escape as far as possible, otherwise the ghost knows what will happen later. After all, in such a chaotic and troublesome situation, if you want to survive, you must protect yourself wisely. I don't know how far I escaped. I passed through a jungle and crossed a river. I passed through several villages nearby, but basically there were no human beings in these villages. Precisely. There are humans, but most of these humans have become corpses. Some of them have already been captured by those humanoid ants. The purpose of these humanoid ants is very simple, which is to capture human beings back and feed them to their queens. This way their genes will be strengthened. It has to be said that this is a very heroic plan, but in the Dark Continent, no matter what creature it is, it must become stronger. If you don't want to be eaten by other creatures, and you don't want to be treated as food by other creatures, then you must continue to purify your genes to become stronger. Otherwise, it can only become a delicacy for the strong, and the strong are often cruel and brutal. Roy didn't know how long it took, and finally he passed another village. This village is quiet and peaceful, and there are still human beings. He was going to go in and find the villagers to get something to eat. For him, he was suffering from hunger and cold, and fleeing all the way, wasted a lot of energy. And the most important thing is that he doesn't dare to reveal too much of his identity now, because he doesn't want to cause unnecessary trouble. But when he walked into the village, he regretted it, because the village was not as peaceful and quiet as it appeared on the surface. Because this village has already been occupied long ago, the reason why it is so quiet and there is no problem at all is because these humanoid ants have made a trap. After all, the nearby villages are protected by big cities, and these big cities will help. So when nearby villages are invaded by alien creatures, the city will send troops to help. The human-shaped ants are quite smart. For them, ordinary people and villagers are not strong enough physically, and those well-trained soldiers are different. Their bodies are strong enough, so they can be captured and eaten, which can provide better genes. So for those humanoid ants, they will only catch humans with stronger genes and better genes. As for others, they simply look down on them. After Roy realized that he had been deceived, he didn't panic, nor was he in a hurry. For him, he must be steady at this time, and he must not be in a hurry. He slowly backed away. It was really a disadvantage for him to leave this place and fight with these things all the time, because the existence of these things meant nothing to him. That's very threatening, so leaving as soon as possible is the best option. But how could the humanoid ants let go of this delicious food? What's more, this is a hunter x-hunter. A hunter who physically forces a hunter with special abilities to deal with a hunter, and these ants are the most hated. Because they hate hunter is the existence of hunting them specifically, so for ants. They want to kill the hunter, take it back to the queen to eat, and then continue to enhance and strengthen the gene. Just a few decades, Roy was already surrounded by humanoid ants. Now there is no way to retreat. Originally, he wanted to escape from this village, but the village was already surrounded by humanoid ants. As Hunter x Hunter, his previous escape was a wrong decision, and he should avenge the villagers no matter what. Roy didn't hesitate anymore, and rushed towards the humanoid ants with a black long sword in his hand. Roar. The intelligence of these humanoid ants is obviously not high, they only rely on intuition and instinct to attack the enemy, so they have no fear of Roy who is actively attacking, and more humanoid ants gather from all directions. Roy waved the black long sword in his hand, and chopped down the two humanoid ants blocking the way in front of him to the ground. But soon there were new humanoid ants to fill the vacancy and continue to besiege him. These humanoid ants are very tough, even heavy weapons may not be able to kill them, but Roy has a special ability, that is, sword energy. Sword chi can penetrate the human body and inflict damage on it, and at the same time it can cause fatal damage to such low-level monsters. Although the sword energy consumes a lot, and it is difficult to condense the sword energy again after use, Roy still chooses to use the sword energy to attack. As long as he can kill enough humanoid ants, then he will be safe tonight. Puff, puff. The humanoid ants groaned as they fell to their feet and struggled to get up, but then they would be knocked to the ground by Roy. The place where Roy is standing now is already full of corpses of humanoid ants. It seems that he has successfully cleaned up the humanoid ants within 100 meters around him. But then, many new humanoid ants were added one after another. They gathered more and more, and finally formed a hill, which surrounded Roy. Roy looked up and saw that the sky was densely covered with humanoid ants, and their number probably reached at least 3,000. It is less than 20 kilometers away from the village. According to the speed of humanoid ants, they can rush back in 5 minutes at most, and the whole village will be finished by then. No, the battle must be resolved as soon as possible. Gritting his teeth, Roy knew he had to do something. He raised the long sword in his hand, running the entire spiritual calendar. In the next second, a strong sword intent was released from Roy. This sword intent swept across the entire forest like a gust of wind, and all the humanoid ants around Roy were affected. They stopped and stared blankly at Roy, as if they had fallen into a fantasy. Roy took a deep breath, opened his eyes wide, and yelled violently, Break it. Accompanied by his words, countless streaks of golden light burst out from Roy's body, and the golden light instantly transformed into thousands of streaks of sword energy and shot out. These sword chi fell on these humanoid ants like a rain of sharp arrows. For a while, the screams continued, and every humanoid ant that was shot would be sent flying. In less than half a minute, the surroundings were already covered with corpses of humanoid ants. Some of these corpses had turned into meat paste, while others still maintained their appearance when they were alive. Whoa, whoa. Roy panted and sat on the ground to rest. The move just now cost him a lot, and now he feels sore all over his body. Whether it is sword energy or magic, the consumption is quite huge, and the power is also amazingly powerful. If Roy is willing, he can exterminate humanoid ants with one move. However, his magic value has already been exhausted, and he can't cast magic at all in his current state, so he can only use sword energy to attack humanoid ants. Looking at the humanoid ants all over the mountains, Roy couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The village must have fallen now, right? Not only that, the things here will spread quickly, and the nearby towns or villages will definitely encounter this kind of thing. Roy suddenly had a crazy idea. He wanted to rush out to rescue the residents here before the humanoid ants recovered. But he calmed down immediately. He was just an ordinary hunter. Even if I was in my heyday, I might not be able to kill these humanoid ants, but now I have less than half of my physical strength left. If I act rashly, I may be caught by the humanoid ants, will eat them. Moreover, Roy was also worried that the nearby villages would encounter the same thing. After all, this group of humanoid ants had obviously lost their ability to think. The only thing he can do now is to wait here. I only hope that the human resistance army can arrive in time, otherwise, human beings will be really in danger. Squeak. A sharp cry came from the side. Roy turned his head and saw a guy slightly bigger than other humanoid ants walking in front of him. The humanoid ant was covered in blood and slime, but Roy could still see a piece of skin ripped off its chest, exposing the red and white tissue inside. This is... Roy's pupils shrank suddenly. He recognized this thing. Devil virus? The devil virus is a strange virus that parasitizes humans. Because the humans that this virus parasitizes basically live shortly, it is called the devil virus. However, the devil virus will only appear in early childhood, and it takes about 10 years for adulthood. This devil virus can leave traces on the host, allowing the host's parents to find the host. And the bloody wound on the chest of this humanoid ant was obviously caused by the devil virus. Half of the head of this humanoid ant was cut off, and there was still a shocking scar on the neck. Blood flowed out from the wound, staining the ground red. It didn't seem to be dead yet. Its eyes were still wide open, staring at Roy. "You're not dead yet," Roy muttered to himself. At this moment, he suddenly noticed that the abdomen of the humanoid ant was swollen, and then there was a crisp sound in its stomach, and then there was a sound of bang, and the humanoid ant burst open. Numerous minced meat and plasma splashed all around, and even splashed on Roy's cheek. Roy froze for a moment, then reached out to wipe off the remaining minced flesh on his face. "It's disgusting." Roy frowned and muttered, then turned his gaze to several other directions. In the distance, there are several larger human-shaped ants, and they are slowly approaching Ding. Roy's heart sank. The strength of these humanoid ants is much stronger than that just now. Each of them is comparable to a second-level knight, and there may even be an extraordinary level. As for himself, he is only a first-order hunter. What to do? Roy was secretly anxious. He had nothing to do now, because his physical strength had been severely depleted, let alone a head-to-head confrontation with an opponent of the extraordinary level. Even a first-level knight, he couldn't beat the second clan. Am I really going to die here today? Roy shook his head with a wry smile, and said self-deprecatingly, "However, if you can kill so many humanoid ants, you can die with peace." He was ready for death. However, to Roy's surprise, those humanoid ants did not attack Roy. They bypassed Roy's body and dripped towards other humanoid ants. Huh. Roy was taken aback for a moment, and then realized, these humanoid ants are eating? Do they regard me as the same kind? These humanoid ants seem to have a high sensitivity to the smell of blood. Roy killed these humanoid ants just now, causing the bloody smell to spread here, luring nearby humanoid ants to come over. Looking at the backs of these humanoid ants, Roy felt a sense of sadness in his heart. He didn't stop these humanoid ants, because he knew that he had no chance of winning. Since the end was already doomed, it would be a good deed to help these humanoid ants out. Soon, these humanoid ants devoured about 300 humanoid ants, and finally they stopped swallowing, and the blood stains and sticky mucus on their bodies gradually decreased. The original bloodthirsty and ferocious aura on them disappeared, replaced by a kind of blankness and emptiness. Their intelligence has been reduced to a creepy level. At this moment, Roy vaguely heard the roar of guns, and it became clearer and clearer, and it was getting closer and closer to him. It's the human rebels coming. Hope rose in Roy's heart. He immediately stood up and ran towards the direction of the sound of gunfire. Soon, Roy saw two teams. The two teams had about the same number of personnel, but their equipment had their own characteristics. One team wore armor, while the other team wore lightweight soft armor. Not all the same. The leaders of these two teams are knights. One is a 5th Order knight, and the other is a 6th Order knight. Roy remembered that he had seen these two people in the village square before, and he thought that these two people also belonged to the captain of a certain village. Roy. Why did you appear here? At this moment, the 5th level knight was the first to spot Roy, and he immediately turned around and ran towards Roy. His voice is very familiar. It is the voice of the captain of the village guard. Captain, I'm here to find you, Roy said happily. Looking for me? The captain asked in surprise. At this time, he also saw those human-shaped ants in the distance, and suddenly took a breath. Why are there human-shaped ants here? Could it be 2.0? Before he finished speaking, Roy nodded and said, yes, the humanoid ants here are all monsters that came out from the depths of the village. The captain's face sank when he heard this, and he asked, what about the captain? Where is he? Roy shook his head and said, I don't know, he took people into the depths of the village and never appeared again. I guess he died inside. Hearing this news, the captain was silent for a moment, and then said, come with me. After finishing speaking, the captain turned his horse's head and galloped away towards the distance. Roy quickly got on his horse and chased after the captain. Under the leadership of the captain, the two headed north. After passing through a small forest, Roy saw a wooden house and several corpses piled up next to the wooden house. These corpses were male and female, and their clothes should be from village's civilians in. Roy looked at the captain, who had no expression on his face, as if he didn't notice the corpses. He pushed the door straight into O9's room, closed the door smoothly, and then waved to Roy, come in. Roy hesitated, but still walked in. He always felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. The furnishing of this room is very simple. Apart from a bed, a table and chairs, and a wooden barrel, there are only a lot of dry hay piled up in the corner. The withered grass looks a little old, but it can be vaguely distinguished that these grasses seem to be used for weaving baskets, but because of the long-term lack of sunlight, the withered grass has withered and rotted. Captain. Roy couldn't help asking, aren't you afraid of these humanoid ants? We are used to it, the captain said lightly. Roy was stunned. A habit. The captain sighed and said, you may not know that although these humanoid ants look ferocious and terrifying, they are not actually threatening. We have studied it a long time ago. As long as we avoid direct conflict with them, there will be no threat. Too much danger. Do you know why? The captain asked suddenly. Why? Roy was stunned for a moment, then remembered what the captain said just now. Because these humanoid ants don't have the ability to think at all, they only know how to kill. Their only instinct is to kill, and this instinct will be controlled and executed by the residual consciousness in their minds. The captain continued, we call it refinement. Braised. Roy was stunned. After going berserk, the intelligence of these monsters will decrease, and their fighting power will continue to decline, but at the same time they will become extremely crazy. They will kill regardless of life and death, and will not escape or hide. The captain explained, this state maintains it won't be long, so we must solve them as soon as possible, otherwise we will be in trouble after they regain their senses. Roy suddenly realized. He understood that the reason why this kind of monsters are called devil worms is because they have the ability to go berserk, and after they go berserk, they will completely lose their minds and only rely on instinct to kill. Scale reproduction. Roy originally didn't want to enter the village to fight these humanoid ants. But the system gave a dungeon task, that is, as long as the humanoid ants in the village are wiped out, you will get a god-level weapon presented by the system. This is no small temptation for him as Hunter x Hunter. So he finally decided to enter the village and wipe out all the humanoid ants in the village. Because he felt that at this time he should show a little tough attitude. After all, in the eyes of these humanoid ants, he is an outsider. Listen. My name is Roy. Standing at the entrance of the village, Roy shouted loudly to the group of humanoid ants in front of him. You all have to die today. Afterwards, Roy waved the long sword in his hand and rushed towards the group of humanoid ants. Ho ho. The humanoid ants roared when they saw Roy attacking. Then they also raised their weapons and charged towards Roy. Roy didn't use grudge, but relied on the strength and speed of his body to confront these humanoid ants. Although Roy's strength is great, he can't completely suppress this group of humanoid ants. Roy was also very surprised when he confronted these humanoid ants. Because these humanoid ants are more powerful than I imagined, they actually have the strength of the 5th level. If it weren't for Roy's strength 5 times higher than the same level, I'm afraid I really can't beat these guys. No wonder the system asked me to help in the village. It turns out that the humanoid ants here have reached the 5th level. These guys are really perverted. Roy sighed secretly. In this case, his chances of winning are even lower. But Roy still persisted. Even though he was bitten several times by humanoid ants, Roy did not give up and continued to fight bravely. Roy felt that this style of play was too slow, so he directly used the skill, Magic Missile. Whoosh! The magic missile flew out of Roy's hand in an instant, and after landing, it exploded. Boom. The whole village shook, and those humanoid ants suffered great damage. Even Roy himself was injured. Fortunately, such an injury was nothing to him, and he recovered quickly. Roy raised his long sword again, ready to attack the humanoid ants in the village again. Ho ho. But suddenly, a roar resounded all around. Roy looked up and found that the leader of those humanoid ants had appeared. At this moment, its eyes were red and its mouth was wide open, as if it was brewing something. Roy immediately became vigilant. He knew that this humanoid ant was definitely not simple, because the attack just now was enough to prove it. Roar. Suddenly the humanoid ant yelled loudly. Boom. There was a muffled sound. A group of flames suddenly appeared in front of Roy, and then the group of flames spread rapidly, sweeping towards Roy. Oops. Roy cursed secretly. The temperature of the flame was extremely high, and it also carried destructive attack power. Roy dodged immediately, dodging the flames. Whoa whoa. Roy just left that place. The soil in that place was scorched. Moreover, these flames condensed into a fire dragon in the air, chasing Roy with its teeth and claws. F*K. Can it still be like this? Roy was taken aback, and quickly used his lightness skills to escape. Call out. As soon as Roy left here, the fire dragon fell on the place where he was just now, and burned a hole in the land. Roy looked back and found that the humanoid ant leader actually summoned another flame. This flame was weaker, but Roy didn't dare to be careless at all. Damn it. Why are you so unlucky? Roy cursed secretly. Ho ho. The humanoid ant leader was a little surprised when he saw that Roy was able to dodge his own attack, and he roared again. Roy knew that it was the humanoid ant calling the other men to come over. However, Roy is not afraid of noon. Hey, since you guys like playing with fire so much, then I will play with you guys. Roy sneered. But with more and more humanoid ants. At the same time, the abilities of these crowd ants are getting stronger, the level is getting higher and higher, and the wisdom is getting higher and higher. This makes Roy even more difficult to deal with. Although he has awakened now, he has the ability of Hunter x Hunter, and at the same time he still has the ability of the white beard panel to have the devil fruit. But at this moment Roy was exhausted physically and mentally, and he had consumed too much. He could have won this battle, but the opponent had too many ants. These humanoid ant soldiers don't want money, and 087 does. After all, there is a very deep ant queen behind them. So for them, they don't have to worry about dying out at all. The sea of people tactics, the attrition tactics are their tactics. If he doesn't continue to consume like this, he will definitely die in this place today, Roy sighed. He definitely couldn't continue like this, and now he had to retreat quickly. As for the sacred weapon given by the system, he didn't want it anymore, because it was meaningless. After all, he could not even save his life, so the temptation of the sacred weapon would not be great. What he had to do now was to save his life first, and the current situation was still relatively serious, and survival was always the most important thing. But it's not easy to get out now, because I'm already in a deadlock. All of this seems to be deliberately arranged by the system, and I feel like I've been tricked by the system. But if it's an actual fight to the end, it's not like there's no chance. If it's just like that, there will be a lot of risk. Roy has never been a person who likes to take risks. Finally, after going through a bloody battle, he finally found a gap and successfully broke through, but he regretted it again. Because he thought that these humanoid ants would have a steady stream of assistance. But after taking it out, it was discovered that the team of humanoid ants had actually broken down, that is to say, this army of humanoid ants. There is no longer any assistance. If you kill the remaining humanoid ants in the village, you can get the holy weapon. And there are only a few thousand ants in the village at most, but it is impossible to go back now, because I have no intention of fighting anymore. It's really hateful. It seems that it is necessary to stick to the original intention. Otherwise, I would have already obtained the peerless artifact. What a pity. It is useless to regret now. Roy knows very well in his heart that if you miss it, you miss it, and it is almost impossible to redeem it, but there is one thing he doesn't understand. Why there are so many ants, and why the ants are so courageous. This is what he can't figure out the most. They even started to attack the village protected by the city. And what are those people in the city doing? What are their troops doing? Logically speaking, they should do something, but so far they haven't done much. Is it because they don't want to take care of it? It was so much fun. If these ants are allowed to develop like this, then this disaster will only become more and more troublesome. As time goes by, it will be really difficult at that time. What should they do when it ends? I'm afraid they have no choice. Roy took a deep breath. For him, he has no control over it, nor does it belong to him. He just wants to find a place to take a hot bath. But Roy eventually turned around. For him, sacred weapons are not important. What is important is to be able to get more experience points, which is the top priority. Coming to the depths of the village, as Roy imagined, there are thousands of humanoid ants in the depths of the village. Roy sighed. It will take some time and effort to clean up all these humanoid ant soldiers. But there is no way, only by destroying all these humanoid ant soldiers, can he get the system reward, the holy weapon. Although he has become Hunter x Hunter now, he only has a level of 100. So there was no way, Roy could only raise the black iron sword in his hand and rush towards the humanoid ant soldiers. Ding dong. System prompt. Kill 10 humanoid ant soldiers, you can get the holy weapon. Ding dong. System prompt. Kill 50 humanoid ant soldiers, and you can get a silver-ranked treasure, the spider web set. Ding dong. After the system beeped 3 times in a row, Roy finally stopped attacking. Because, in front of him, appeared 10 humanoid ant soldiers, each of which was about 2 meters tall and covered with golden carapace. So big? Seeing the other party's incomparably huge body, Roy couldn't help frowning. And, what's more, they actually fly. Buzz buzz. After 10 humanoid ant soldiers uttered sharp chirps, they rushed towards Roy. They were extremely fast, and they came to Roy in the blink of an eye, waving their sharp claws, intending to smash Roy into pieces. However, Roy's reaction was not slow at all. He kicked his feet on the ground and jumped up suddenly, avoiding the attack of the humanoid ant soldier. Clang. The long sword collided with the metal carapace on the humanoid ant soldier, shooting out dazzling sparks. However, what surprised Roy was that his sword, which could easily cut through steel, only broke through the opponent's skin without causing any substantial damage to him. So hard. Roy whispered. At this moment, the humanoid ant soldier who was dodged by Roy turned towards him again. Roy dodges hastily, narrowly dodging the attack of the humanoid ant soldiers, and at the same time cursed inwardly. This damn system clearly said that the humanoid ant soldier's defense is very weak, but as a result, he suffered a terrible loss as soon as he met him, and was almost caught. What a shame. But there is no way, the matter has come to this point, Roy can only continue to fight. He knew that this situation would never allow him to choose to back down, otherwise, let alone a magic weapon, he was afraid that his life would be in danger. On the other side, when the humanoid ant soldier saw Roy dodging his attack, he immediately turned around and chased him again. Boom. As they moved, the earth trembled. Roy gritted his teeth, clenched his long sword, and went forward. Bang bang bang. Bang bang bang. Peefed. Roy and 10 humanoid ant soldiers fought fiercely. Under Roy's attack regardless of cost, one humanoid ant soldier finally couldn't hold on and fell down. Roy was taken aback. He didn't expect to get 3 sacred items after killing these humanoid ant soldiers. This is simply a very interesting thing. Although the level of these things is not high, no more than the 4th level at most, the advantage lies in the large number. Of course, Roy also noticed that the higher the level of these things, the more precious and rare they are. Roy reckoned that these things should just explode from ordinary humanoid ant soldiers. But even so, Roy was very satisfied. Because Roy's level is too low, there is no need to worry about not having enough level to use these sacred items. On the contrary, his level is enough, and these things are just right for him. As for how to obtain these sacred items, Roy thinks this is not a big problem. As long as he keeps killing humanoid ant soldiers, sooner or later these sacred quality things will be his. Whoosh. After cutting down the humanoid ant soldier with a sword, Roy retreated quickly. Because he found that there was something wrong with these human-shaped codes, they seemed to have thinking, and they were not just some simple biochemical soldiers as rumored by the outside world. These humanoid ant soldiers stood up immediately after falling down, and then rushed to Roy again. Looking at the 10 humanoid ant soldiers who surrounded him again, Roy frowned, then suddenly accelerated and rushed towards the nearest humanoid ant soldier. He wanted to try to see what was so special about these humanoid ant soldiers. Clang. Roy's longsword confronted a metal hook in the hand of one of the humanoid ant soldiers. Crack. Accompanied by the ear-piercing sound of friction, Roy felt the black iron sword in his hand tremble violently as if struck by a sledgehammer, and even faintly felt a strong numbness. So hard. Roy couldn't help gasping. Although Roy didn't use magic power, nor did he use spiritual power, and only relied on physical strength, he still felt the oppression brought to him by this weapon. Boom. Taking advantage of Roy's slight loss of consciousness, the humanoid ant soldier next to him raised his leg and kicked Roy. Roy hurriedly avoided it, but was still kicked to the waist and abdomen, and suddenly felt sore. What a powerful force. Roy's eyes widened in surprise. You know, he is now the power of the First Order peak. Even if he doesn't use magic power, his physical strength alone is far stronger than other First Order demons. However, he couldn't resist the opponent's random blow at all. Seeing that the blow failed, the humanoid ant soldier on the opposite side jumped forward again, opened his mouth, showing sharp teeth, and wanted to swallow Roy alive. Drink. Roy yelled, and swiped the long sword in his hand, forcing back the attack of the humanoid ant soldier. At the same time, he took the time to pull out the dagger in his backpack and cut towards the throat of the humanoid ant soldier. Clang. A piercing metal collision sounded, and Roy was bounced away by the metal hook in the hand of the humanoid ant soldier. This guy's body is really like a tank. At this time, the humanoid ant soldiers took the opportunity to attack. Roy did not dare to fight recklessly, so he could only run away again. However, before Roy took 2 steps, he heard a dull sound behind him. Roy looked back, and found that the 2 humanoid ant soldiers who had just been knocked to the ground by him just got up. Damn. Roy cursed in his heart. In this case, he had to change his strategy. So, after avoiding the attack of the humanoid ant soldiers, Roy went around behind them, ready to sneak attack. However, before Roy had time to get close, he heard, whoosh. Immediately afterwards, a burly figure flashed past instantly, and sent him flying with a punch. Roy slowly got up from the ground, and was stunned when he saw the other person's appearance. It turned out to be a red humanoid ant. At the same time, his whole body was completely red except for his eyes. Roar. The red humanoid ant soldier roared angrily, then moved his thick legs and rushed towards Roy again. Roy hurriedly swung his knife to block. However, Roy is in big trouble this time. Because the opponent's speed was very fast, he almost flew out with a knife, and Roy felt that his tiger's mouth was shattered. F*K. Roy's eyes widened. Isn't the power of this red humanoid ant soldier too exaggerated? At this time, other humanoid ant soldiers around rushed over and attacked Roy. Roy didn't dare to neglect, and hurriedly met the enemy with a sword. This time, he didn't dare to keep his hand anymore, and directly activated the Hunter x Hunter bloodline ability. The long sword in his hand suddenly emitted a faint golden light, and the blade became longer and wider. This is the first time Roy has used the bloodline ability in actual combat. Although he doesn't know what kind of bloodline it is, its power should not be underestimated. Roy swung his sword to block, and with one sword, the 2 humanoid ant soldiers were sent flying. At the same time, the humanoid ant soldier behind him also rushed forward. At this time, Roy didn't care about being exposed anymore. He slashed at the humanoid ant soldier behind him with a sword. But to Roy's surprise, the humanoid ant soldier didn't even dodge after seeing the long sword that Roy was slashing at. Instead, he stretched out his hand to grab Roy's long sword. Looking for death. Roy snorted coldly, twisting his wrist violently. Clang. A spark lit up, and the long sword slashed fiercely on the arm of the humanoid ant soldier. However, the humanoid ant soldier only shook slightly before regaining his composure. Roy's pupils shrank. It's so hard. Hiss. The attack of the humanoid ant soldier was imminent. Roy had to give up the idea of attacking the humanoid ant soldier and waved his long sword to defend. Ding, ding, ding. There was a burst of intensive impact sounds, and every blow made Roy's long sword tremble slightly, as if it was about to be thrown out of his hand. The arm of the humanoid ant soldier was also numb from the shock, and he couldn't help letting go of his fingers. Taking advantage of your illness to kill you, Roy snatched the metal hook from the opponent's hand, then slammed it up, and threw it into the ant colony behind him. Jumped into the air, and the lotus sword slashed down. Roy's sword contained all his strength, which was the limit of his current skills. After this blow, he was confident that he could cut off the humanoid ant soldier in half. However, something happened that surprised Roy. Ding. Roy slashed down with his sword, but there was a sound of gold and iron clanging, and then he was blocked by an invisible force, and he couldn't continue. What's going on? Roy blinked suspiciously, then looked at the metal plate next to the humanoid ant soldier. This metal plate is engraved with many cumbersome patterns and runes. Obviously, it should be used to help the humanoid ants resist attacks. No wonder it is so arrogant, so it has this thing. Roy squinted his eyes. He guessed that the reason why humanoid ant soldiers can ignore the attacks of ordinary human soldiers is probably because of this metal plate. Roy tried to swing the long sword, and sure enough, the metal plate around the humanoid ant soldier shone brightly, blocking the long sword. It seems that this metal plate must be destroyed, Roy thought secretly, and then raised his sword again to strike down. But the result is still the same as before. The metal plate emits a dazzling light, blocking Roy's attack. This thing, the Ant Queen specially evolved some humanoid ant soldiers, Roy whispered. At this time, the humanoid lone ant soldier rushed over again. Call. Roy hurriedly backed away, opened the distance, then swung his long sword, drew an arc in the air, and shot towards the humanoid ant soldier. Laugh. The long sword sliced across the chest of the humanoid ant soldier, but did not cause any damage to it. But at this time, Roy suddenly sensed a hint of danger, and hurriedly turned to avoid it. But it was too late. A metal gun passed through his shoulder from behind. Bang bang bang. A series of attacks came from all directions, and Roy could only be tired of parrying. Finally, when Roy blocked an attack from the humanoid ant soldier for the last time, he staggered back a few steps and his face turned pale. Hiss. The scarlet eyes of the humanoid ant soldier stared at Roy, then suddenly jumped up and charged towards Luo. Roy raised his eyebrows and swung his sword to block the attack of the humanoid ant soldiers. This time, instead of being shocked backwards like before, Roy kicked the head of the humanoid ant soldier and sent it flying. But at this time, 3 more humanoid ant soldiers rushed up and launched a new round of attacks on Roy. Roy gritted his teeth and persisted. Although he really wanted to get rid of the 5 humanoid ant soldiers as soon as possible, but these 5 guys were rough-skinned and thick-skinned, and there was nothing he could do with them for a while. I rub it. Why is it so hard? Roy couldn't help but swear. Even if the blood concentration in his body is higher than that of a humanoid ant, it is not so powerful. Roy estimated that he should be slightly better than these 5 guys in his prime, but now, he is at a disadvantage. Boom. 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 Suddenly, 3 muffled sounds came from behind Roy. He turned around hastily, and suddenly found a humanoid ant soldier standing behind him at some point. They held long guns and stabbed Roy from 3 angles. Roy was shocked. He had no idea that the other party could predict his actions. These 3 spears blocked all of Roy's escape paths, and the only thing he could do was to choose to fight with all his might. Roy took a deep breath, then swung the long sword violently, forming a bright sword curtain in front of him, trying to block the 3 long spears. However, at this moment, ferocious smiles appeared on the corners of the mouths of the 3 humanoid ant soldiers, and they suddenly accelerated the speed of stabbing their spears, as if eager to defeat the enemy of the human race. Puff. 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 Accompanied by 3 flesh-piercing sounds, 3 spears stabbed Roy's abdomen, left shoulder and right shoulder successively. Roy's face changed drastically, and he could even feel the pain caused by the 3 spears piercing his clothes. How is it possible? Roy's eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. It stands to reason that although the humanoid ant soldier is protected by armor, it is still impossible to block the sharpness of the long sword. But now, the 3 spears stabbed Roy's body, and there were only a few shallow white marks on Roy's body. This is so spooky. All of this is related to that metal plate. That piece of metal was a piece of super equipment. No matter what method Roy used to attack, he couldn't break through its surface defense. Roar. Seeing that he had succeeded, the 3 humanoid ant soldiers immediately roared to the sky. The black light on their bodies instantly increased, and then swung their spears violently, stabbing at Roy. Facing the combined attack of the 3 spears, Roy didn't dare to hesitate, and suddenly moved his body to the side to avoid the attack of the spears. Immediately afterwards, Roy exerted strength on his legs and stomped heavily on the ground. With the help of the anti-shock force, his body was ejected and landed on the top of one of the humanoid ant soldiers, stepping on its forehead. Peefed. The humanoid ant soldier's brain burst, and his body fell to the ground. The other 2 humanoid ant soldiers did not stop attacking at all. One swept their legs, and the other punched Roy, forcing Roy to avoid the attack temporarily. Boom. As soon as Roy avoided it, a giant fist slammed hard on the wall behind him, and a small part of the wall was directly dented. Fortunately, Roy dodged in time just now, otherwise, this punch would definitely kill his veteran. At this time, the humanoid ant soldier on the side had already rushed up, aiming at Roy's chest and stabbing him. Roy's pupils shrank, and then he rolled backward suddenly, narrowly avoiding the attack of the spear. Phew. However, in the next second, a metal arrow shot out, stabbing precisely at the position where Roy was just now. If Roy hadn't rolled in time enough, he might have been lying dead by now. Damn. Roy cursed, twisted his body, quickly dodged the attack of an ant soldier, and at the same time stretched out his hand to grab the arm of a humanoid ant soldier. With one hand, Roy pulled it directly to him, then with a flick of his wrist, the long sword in his hand instantly pierced into its chest, nailing it to the wall. Roy turned over beautifully, landed firmly on the ground, and then turned his head to look at the metal plate. On the metal plate, the originally dull brilliance suddenly bloomed at this time, releasing a dazzling silver-white brilliance, and a thin silver-white shield enveloped Roy's whole body. On Roy's arm, silver-white fine scales gradually grew out, covering the entire palm. Ding. At the same time, the three humanoid ant soldiers jumped up and stabbed Roy fiercely with the spears in their hands, but Roy avoided it easily because of his extremely sensitive speed. Roar. Seeing that their attack failed, the three humanoid ant soldiers roared angrily, and then spun around Roy again. This time Roy was more vigilant, because he found that every time the three humanoid ant soldiers attacked, the surrounding metal plates would emit a similar light, and then their movements would change accordingly, making it difficult for Roy to catch them. Clang. 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 The long sword in Roy's hand continued to slash out, and brilliant sword energy continued to spread in all directions. Roy, on the other hand, was looking for opportunities in the sword chi, looking for a way to defeat these humanoid ant soldiers. However, although these ant soldiers are clumsy, they are actually very cunning. They not only use the defensive energy of the metal plate to attack, but also know how to avoid Roy's attack, so that Roy can't really get close to them. Boom. In the distance, the disc-shaped metal plate trembled suddenly, as if it was struggling. Then, the luster on its surface became brighter and brighter, and finally got out of control. Roy is now under siege, although she said she wants to find the metal plate, but he has no chance. Because if he doesn't break through again, he will most likely die. Originally, he had determined that these humanoid ant soldiers had no support, but now these humanoid ant soldiers suddenly had a volunteer group. Everything was unexpected, but no matter what, the current predicament had to be resolved first. After all, he was in deep danger, and if he could not resolve this situation, he would die miserably. Luo Yi is now wishing in his heart that it would be great if he could have a group of teammates, a group of partners, so that he would not have to fight alone, and there would be no need to take too many risks. It's a pity that he seems to be doomed to not have a partner, so he has no choice. It is even more difficult to break through without a partner. He can only work harder, and whether he can go out depends entirely on God's will, but he has never been a person who will give up easily. After all, for him, since he is here, he has to do something and leave something behind before leaving this ghostly place. The Dark Continent is indeed a very scary place. A place that a person can't figure out, at least for now, he doesn't know of. Roy firmly grasped the black iron sword with both hands, and now he wanted to break out from the village, because the village was surrounded by humanoid ant soldiers, soldiers on the third and outer floors. If he wants to survive, he must desperately break through. But there were too many enemies in front of him, and they all had extremely terrifying power and defense. Roy had already killed dozens of humanoid ants in a row, but he didn't suffer any damage. What is even more frightening is that they are still increasing continuously. Roy was already in a desperate situation at this time. He even saw white lights emanating from the tops of the human ant soldiers, and then the human ant soldiers would grow in size and grow in length. Damn it. Are you really going to be buried here today? No. Roy will never be reconciled. He suddenly raised the long sword and injected the little spiritual power left in his body into the minister of the sword. Slash. With a roar, the long sword slammed down. Immediately, with the long sword as the core, the surrounding space seemed to be cut into two halves, a huge black crack appeared instantly, and those humanoid ant soldiers were also separated into left and right halves, and fell dead on the ground. Finally out of the predicament, Roy took a deep breath, ready to charge out again. But at this moment, Roy felt a sharp pain in the sole of his foot. Looking down, he found that the humanoid ant soldiers whose heads had been cut off by him got up again and quickly gathered towards him. Recovered so quickly. What to do? Roy knew very well that if these humanoid ants surrounded him, he would not be able to escape at all, and the only thing he could rely on was the long sword in his hand. However, he used the strongest skill just now. Although he temporarily repelled these humanoid ants, his spiritual power was almost exhausted, and he could not exert the strongest power at all. Roy gritted his teeth, and poured the remaining spiritual power into the long sword again. At the same time, he completely concentrated his consciousness into the long sword. Suddenly, the long sword in his hand emitted a dazzling silver light, and the whole weapon seemed to be on fire. Give me break. Accompanied by Roy's angry roar, he clenched his long sword and swept forward with all his might. This time, he directly chopped off all the humanoid ants around him. He staggered back a few steps and almost fell to the ground. However, this time miraculously allowed him to break through a passage. The road in this small alley is not that wide, he only needs to follow the corners and minimize the chances of intersecting with other people to get out easily. Roy knew that he had won the bet this time, and those humanoid ant soldiers would not be able to catch up with him in a short time. After all, their movement speed was not as fast as Roy's. However, his physical condition was already very bad. The previous battle consumed a lot of his mental power, and, in this narrow terrain, he couldn't display any brilliant skills. The current situation is, he only needs to get out of the alley smoothly and everything will be fine. However, when Roy just took a step, suddenly, a strong sense of danger flooded his whole body, making his hairs stand on end, and a feeling of being on the verge of death enveloped his head. His reaction was quick, and the moment he noticed something strange, Roy had turned sideways to avoid the attack. At the same time, a dagger slashed across his waist, bringing up a splash of blood. Roy looked gloomy and stared at the attacker coldly. On his right shoulder, bright red blood flowed out, staining his clothes red. Roy looked past the attacker and saw another thin, ordinary-looking boy. He just stood there, holding a dagger with a grim expression. "Who are you?" Roy asked. He remembered that this guy was hiding in the dark just now, waiting for the best opportunity to sneak attack. Hee hee. The devil boy smiled. His smile was extraordinarily cruel. "Guess what?" Roy frowned. "Your skills are very good, especially swordsmanship. I believe you must have been trained by a master of the swordmaster level? It's a pity that you met us." The boy grinned. "Don't worry, you'll be on your way soon, because you asked for this." While speaking, he slowly raised the dagger in his hand. The blade shone coldly under the light. Roy's pupils shrunk. This guy is an assassin. Moreover, this is a seasoned veteran assassin. In this narrow terrain, Roy's strength is limited. His current combat effectiveness can only be at most 40% to 50% of his usual combat effectiveness, and this devil boy is a veteran assassin, and he has rich combat experience. An absolute nightmare for Roy. Roy knew very well that if he continued to entangle with him, he would be the one who lost in the end. Snort. Roy snorted coldly, turned around and ran towards another fork in the road. The devil boy narrowed his eyes, revealing a fierce light in his eyes, but he didn't choose to chase Roy. When Roy's figure was about to disappear at the corner, the devil boy suddenly reached out and touched under his trouser legs, took out a fireball scroll, and crushed it. Boom. The flames of the explosion engulfed the demon boy and a group of humanoid ant soldiers around him. However, the aftermath of the explosion did not cause any damage to him. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he jumped in and chased in the direction Roy left. Apart from the village, there is a huge building on the outside. There are 2 gates at the entrance of the building, and Roy ran straight towards one of the gates. As soon as he ran into the door, the devil boy appeared at his original location. He stayed for a while, and after confirming that there were no other humans, he ran towards the door on the other side. In the room where Roy was just now, in Roy's spiritual ocean, the stone tablet suddenly emitted a light green brilliance, and then, a series of fine and complicated runes emerged from the stone tablet, slowly spreading along the wall. In the end, every inch of the building was covered. And in every street and every street corner of the building, there are a large number of humanoid ants hidden. These humanoid ants are all humanoid monster soldiers. Their bodies are huge, their arms are thicker, and some even have limbs. There are hard carapaces on their backs, and there is a thick layer of armor on their bodies. At this time, Roy was running wildly in a quiet alley. This is the route he just escaped from, and in front of this route is a wall. He has to climb over this wall to escape. And just when Roy was about to set foot on this wall, his body stiffened suddenly, and his heart was raised in his throat. Ding dong. The system has detected that the host's mental power is too low. Please replenish mental power in time. Search in the system. The price of mental power supplement potion is 10 contribution points, and the purchase permission has been activated. A familiar system prompt sounded in his ears, but at this moment, Roy couldn't care less about thinking too much. Because, behind him, a pair of icy eyes were staring at him. A few meters away from him, the devil boy was looking at him jokingly. Hey hey hey. His figure suddenly became blurred, and then appeared out of nowhere beside Roy, and punched Roy in the chest. Boom. With a muffled grunt, Roy flew upside down, hit the wall, spat out a mouthful of blood, fell to the ground, and struggled to get up. Ha 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 ha. The devil boy looked up to the sky and laughed, his eyes filled with excitement. What a delicious prey. He licked his chapped lips, then rushed to Roy. At this moment, Roy felt as if he was being targeted by a hungry beast. He didn't even dare to think about it, and hurriedly ran for his life again. In the dark night, a figure galloped past. This figure was in a state of embarrassment. His body was covered with a lot of dust, his hair was messy, and his face was pale. He had obviously suffered serious injuries. Was Roy. As he ran, he observed his surroundings vigilantly. After ensuring safety, he took out a bottle of magic potion and poured it into his mouth. Although Roy's injuries were serious, his consciousness was still clear. His physical fitness is far beyond ordinary people. After 2 rounds of fierce battles, although he is out of breath, he can still barely support it.
Damn it, I won't let you go. Roy cursed through gritted teeth.
He is not reconciled. Tonight is destined to be a fierce battle. Roy has never been afraid of fighting, because he knows that sooner or later he will usher in this day. But today, he was a little aggrieved. First, a high-ranking swordsman appeared out of nowhere, followed by another devil boy. Moreover, these 2 guys are extraordinary, both have extremely strong fighting skills and powerful bodies and weapons. At that moment, Roy almost fell into the hands of these 2 guys, but fortunately he used the phantom disintegration in time, otherwise, he would probably be defeated here today. Roy hated himself for being so slow. However, he didn't complain, because he knew that if it were someone else, he would have been killed long ago, and it was already a miracle that he could escape. Roy took a deep breath, got rid of distracting thoughts, and began to recover. He must now recover as soon as possible. He was slightly injured in the battle just now, so he had to hurry up. And behind Roy, the devil boy was following him, and he seemed to plan to get rid of Roy completely in one go. The soles of Roy's feet stepped on the ground fiercely, and his body turned into an afterimage and rushed forward. His movements were extremely fast. When he passed over a crossbar, his body actually jumped over the crossbar and completed a cross in midair, strangely twisted, and then with the help of inertia, the body suddenly bounced and fell to the other side. Behind him, the devil boy is chasing after him. In such an environment, Roy is as flexible as a monkey. Every part of his body seems to be able to become his weapon. Even the wound on his right shoulder can give the enemy a fatal attack. Of course, this kind of injury cannot be recovered in the short term. But Roy is not afraid, because he has a healing technique, and he only needs to spend 1 contribution point to use the healing technique to repair the wound, so he is not afraid of his own injury at all. However, behind Roy, the devil boy is not much weaker than Roy. His steps are elegant, his movements are as fast as the wind, and his speed is not inferior to Roy's. Moreover, behind him, a vine quietly appeared, hovering behind him. Call out. Suddenly, the vine burst out and shot at Roy. Snort. Roy snorted coldly, flicked his finger, and a ray of sword light flashed, cutting off the vine instantly. But the face of the devil boy showed a hint of sarcasm. He kicked his legs, and his body approached Roy like a ghost. Pooh. The dagger cut the sleeve of Roy's left arm, and blood spattered. At the same time, the dagger of the demon boy stabbed Roy's throat. Roy's pupil shrank suddenly, his body swayed slightly, avoiding the opponent's assassination, and his backhand was a whip kick, which hit the opponent's waist and abdomen. Boom. The devil boy's body shook, and he staggered back a few steps, with blood overflowing from the corner of his mouth. Roy took the opportunity to turn around and leave, and this time he didn't care, and rushed forward desperately. No matter what, he would never fall into the hands of that devil boy again. Behind Roy, the devil boy smiled sinisterly, and on his arm, a ball suddenly exploded. There was a loud bang, and thick smoke rose up. Roy had already reacted the moment he heard the sound, and his body suddenly fell down, narrowly avoiding the attack. Hoochie decoration, he gasped heavily. That devil boy actually used poison. This made Roy scream inwardly. Ah! A sharp scream entered Roy's ears. This voice was clearly that of the girl from before. Roy looked up hastily, and saw at the end of his line of sight, a group of demonic boys were surrounding the girl, each one baring their teeth and claws, with ferocious and bloodthirsty eyes. Roar. A ferocious-looking brown bear roared suddenly, and then rushed towards the girl. Roy's pupils shrank, his figure flashed, and he immediately stopped the brown bear. Go away. The brown bear was furious. It waved its sharp claws and patted Roy. Roy frowned slightly, and his figure was slightly sideways, avoiding a blow from the brown bear, and at the same time punched out, knocking him to the ground. The brown bear struggled to stand up, with scarlet eyes, and continued to pounce on Roy. Court death. A cold light appeared in Roy's eyes, and he kicked the brown bear's belly with his right leg. Crack. There was a sound of bone shattering. The brown bear howled in pain, and its huge body fell heavily to the ground. Oh, I thought you were just an ordinary human, but I didn't expect you to be quite powerful. The devil boy came out and said with cold eyes. However, in front of us, any of your efforts are in vain. Roy glanced at the devil boy indifferently. Without saying a word, his figure flashed, and he ran straight away. Want to run? A ruthless look flashed in the devil boy's eyes. If that's the case, then don't blame me for being rude. You won't have this chance. The devil boy sneered sullenly. Roy was startled. He felt a strong wind coming from behind. Obviously it was the devil boy who attacked him secretly. Bastard. Roy cursed, his figure suddenly accelerated, avoiding the attack. Roy found that less than 20 meters in front of him, the devil boy was slowly approaching him with a puff of light green mist. This guy is really haunted. Roy said something in a low voice, and his steps became more messy. He knew that he had to get rid of the other party. Because the green mist is very corrosive, if it gets a little bit contaminated, it will be troublesome. Looks like we can't delay any longer. Roy muttered to himself, and then he stretched out his right palm and aimed at the demon boy in front of him. A flame spurted out suddenly and burned directly towards the devil boy. What is this? The devil boy was startled, and quickly dodged to the side. The flame fell through, but it still burned on the trees behind him, and suddenly, bursts of green smoke rose from the green grass. Roy ignored the burning flames. His body suddenly jumped over the burning plants, and then directly hit another tree trunk. His body was ejected suddenly by the tree trunk, and then both he bent his knees and smashed towards the devil boy's neck. Damn it. You dare to sneak attack me. The devil boy was furious. His body retreated abruptly, avoiding Roy's attack. Then he jumped up suddenly, raised the crossbow in his hand to aim at Roy, and pulled the trigger. Whoosh. A black lacquered arrow pierced through the air. Roy's pupil shrank suddenly, and his body hurriedly lay down on the ground, barely avoiding the arrow. At this time, the other 3 demon boys had already surrounded from 3 directions, forming a siege. Damn it, you can't escape, the devil boy sneered. Roy gritted his teeth. He was already in crisis. But Roy did not choose to give up resistance, because he knew very well that as long as he persisted, he could always wait for rescue. Moreover, Roy also vaguely guessed that the main target of these people was himself. As long as he can persist until others come, then he may have the hope of surviving. Thinking of this, his spirit lifted. A ray of madness appeared in his eyes. He clenched his hands into fists, and suddenly jumped up, attacking the devil boy. Looking for death. There was a trace of coldness on the corner of the devil boy's mouth. He put his hands on the bow, and the 2 sharp arrows condensed again. Then, a light flashed in the devil boy's eyes. Roy's eyes turned cold. He directly used the ability of the devil fruit to blow it away. The ability of the devil fruit is very powerful. He originally wanted to save the village, but now it is unnecessary. Because my own life is almost gone, if I want to save the village and still want to survive, then it is impossible. It seems that I can only give up one of the 2. So give up decisively. As he used the ability of the devil fruit to shake the whole earth, the whole village instantly turned into a huge pit, and the humanoid ants suffered even more. They didn't realize what was going on, and didn't even have time to take off. All fell into the pit. This is the ability of the devil fruit, and the devil fruit has been further upgraded, and there is a stronger ability, that is to let the whole land be controlled by it. All the ants in this big pit were buried alive, but it didn't matter. It was really those humans, especially those short guys. The devil boy is the most troublesome, and there are more than one, or several, which is the most troublesome, and it is not easy to deal with. And when the whole village has become a ruin. Most of the humanoid ants have escaped, because they still have wings and can fly, and they took most of the villagers, because these villagers are villagers and food to them. Roy, as a hunter ex-hunter, logically speaking, he should take action to save these kind-hearted villagers. But conditions do not allow. After all, these guys are very powerful. Especially these devil children. These devil children have extraordinary abilities. Their abilities are terrifying, and they can basically destroy the world, as long as they meet them. Then you don't think it's a good thing, so he can hide as far as he can now. Because the current situation is quite unfavorable. No matter what, I have to live. After all, I finally came to the Dark Continent, so I can't just die like this. Anyway, something has to be gained. After turning the village upside down, those devil children all disappeared, which was a good thing for him, but he didn't dare to stay where he was for too long. He is a hunter ex-hunter after all. He has special abilities, and this world is not just hunter. There are these creatures, and a kind of scary people. Such people are called evil. They are evil hunters, who specialize in hunting hunter ex-hunter. As long as it is hunter ex-hunter, they will never let go of this point. They are the most terrifying. Their strength is not weak, and they have a deal with various creatures. So once you expose your ability, you should leave this place quickly, otherwise you will be targeted, and once you are targeted, it will be troublesome at that time. I don't know how long he ran and finally saw the town. This is good news for him. Only then can he see that the town is civilization. As long as there is civilization, there will not be so many dangers. Although it is said that there will be intrigue, it is better than fighting all the time and trying to survive on the corpse. But it is a pity that the town is now under curfew, and there are soldiers guarding the gate of the city. It is said that strange creatures have sneaked into the city to slaughter the people recently, so the city gate must be closed as soon as the sun goes down, otherwise the monster will enter the city and slaughter the people. So Roy can't get in now, but if he is out overnight, he will be a target for those creatures. Thinking about that situation is not the usual. It will be troublesome at that time. The night of the Dark Continent is probably the most terrifying existence. But no matter what the soldiers guarding the city gate said, the soldiers would not let him in, thinking that he was a monster in disguise. If they continue to entangle, they will make a move, and they have no choice but to give up. Roy left. He found a place not far from the town, and stayed for one night temporarily. Tonight is definitely a restless night. He knows it very well in his heart, but he has no calendar. Who put themselves in such a thing? Now you have to find a way to survive. Tonight is destined to be a restless night. Roy leaned against a big tree, and it was dangerous for him in this wilderness. After all, this was the Dark Continent. Soon he heard a sizzling sound behind him. Immediately afterwards, a big purple snake flew towards him, and Roy frowned. Take out Hunter x Hunter's Swordsman Excalibur. He didn't use any magic to attack, because magic couldn't be cast at all in this kind of place. Ding, Roy stabbed the big snake 7 inches away with a long sword in his hand. Hiss, it howled in pain, then opened its mouth to spit out venom and sprayed it at Roy. Damn it. Roy quickly dodged. He still wanted to save his life to find the elf. It is a pity that although the liquid has been spilled on his face. Crack. His cheeks were in severe pain from burning, but that was all. These were just wounds on the skin. If he couldn't bear even this bit of pain, then he shouldn't be messing around. The big purple snake obviously knew that Roy's strength was far beyond its imagination, so it turned around and prepared to run away. But, how could Roy let it go away? He snorted coldly, raised the Excalibur and rushed forward. The big snake's tail was cut off, and blood splattered everywhere. Roar. The big snake went crazy. It flicked its tail, trying to throw Roy away. But how can Roy be thrown out? He grabbed the tail of the snake, clamped the tail with his feet, hung the whole body on the tail of the snake, and then pulled the big snake back to the ground with a sudden pull. Crack. The snake's bone broke, and bright red blood flowed down the snake's neck. The big snake was writhing in pain. It felt a mortal threat, and if it went on like this, it would undoubtedly die. It raised its head and saw the forest not far away. Its eyes lit up immediately. It decided, while this guy was entangled by itself, it slipped into the jungle first and waited for him to chase him in before killing him. It dragged its injured body to climb deep into the forest. Roy didn't understand what it meant, but he wasn't afraid. Anyway, he was already full. Even if it entered the forest, it couldn't do anything to him. He stood still and waited for the big snake to come out of the forest. Sure enough, soon, he heard a rush of footsteps and a rustling sound from the forest, and he became vigilant. Finally, a huge figure appeared in front of him. Roy narrowed his eyes slightly. He recognized that it was the big snake just now. It's just that the big snake at this moment looks very miserable. The scales all over its body are broken. There are several scars on the body with deep bone visible, and, most importantly, it has lost 2 horns. You are really strong. Big Snake looked at Roy and said slowly, but even if I try my best today, I will kill you. Oh? It's up to you. Roy chuckled. Although he said so, he didn't dare to relax his guard. Hiss. The big snake roared in a low voice, and then charged 14 towards Roy. Its huge body brought a strong momentum. Roy didn't dare to resist it, and quickly avoided it. Boom. It knocked down a tree, but it didn't stop attacking, still rushed towards Roy fiercely. Jingle bell. Roy swung his long sword to fight with it, and the crisp sound of metal collision spread in the air, sparking bursts of sparks. Hiss. The big snake suddenly raised its head to the sky and screamed. Immediately, bursts of hoo-hoo-hoo sounded from its throat. Not good. Roy's color changed instantly. He knew that this was a kind of summoning magic, and it was also a group summoning. Sure enough, with the sound of the wind blowing the grass, all kinds of monsters appeared around Roy, densely packed, with at least a few signs. Some of these magical beasts are as big as calves, and some are shorter, but they all look hideous and terrifying. Roy's expression turned serious, and he couldn't help but rejoice that he was lucky enough to meet a big snake that was alone. And it's still an Orochi alone. Otherwise, with his current strength, there's really no way to deal with it. And, more importantly, the big snake had summoned so many companions, which made Roy feel a little oppressed. There is no absolute thing in this world. Every time Roy thinks that his strength has increased, he finds that his strength has degraded in the next second. This feeling is very bad, as if you have worked hard for a year, only to find that you have regressed by another year. But Roy also knows that he can't shrink back. As long as he sticks to his heart, he will succeed one day. Nothing in this world is eternal, whether it is strong or weak. Hiss. Big Snake saw that Roy was surrounded by hundreds of monsters. He showed an excited expression. As long as you kill this human being, his points will be yours. Hiss. The big snake raised its head high and let out a series of hissing sounds, which was a message to order the heroes. These hundreds of monsters roared one after another, and they all attacked Roy at 660 degrees. The scene of so many monsters attacking together is very spectacular. Even the sky seems to be a bit gloomy. Phew, Roy was agile and dodged a few sharp claws. Boom, the ground trembled, dust was flying, and cracks spread towards Roy. Roy's pupils shrank. He knew that the attacks of these guys were getting stronger. Roy gritted his teeth and continued to dodge. At the same time, he swung his long sword and slashed at the monsters. But unfortunately, his attack strength is too small. It can only cause slight injuries to these monsters, and it is not enough to kill them at all. They are very defensive. This made Roy very angry. He knew that these monsters were summoned by the big snake, and they gathered here for revenge. Hiss. The big snake neighed again. Immediately, these warcraft rioted again. Roy frowned, and he found himself ignoring a problem. That is, the big snake was controlling the attack rhythm of these monsters. Its intelligence is very high, and it can even be said to be very smart. In that case, let's try it. Roy's eyes turned cold. I saw the long sword in his hand glowing with a light blue light, and then suddenly shot out. The blue sword light cut through the void, and rushed towards the monster in front of him with a biting chill. Boom. The sword light exploded, and there was a violent gust of wind around it, rolling up the surrounding grass leaves. These monsters avoided the sword energy in a panic, but they were also forced back by this force for a certain distance. Hiss. The big snake's eyes were locked tightly, staring at Roy. It felt the strength of this force. Ha backquote? Roy let out a long cry again. This time he used fighting energy. Fighting chi turned into a ball of blazing flames attached to his arm, and then punched the big snake's head. Bang. The big snake's body shook a few times, but it was not injured. Roy's face became serious. He knew that the big snake's defense was very strong, but he didn't expect it to be so powerful. He reckoned that with his current all-out blow, even a mountain peak could be pierced, but now he couldn't hurt this big snake. Hiss. The big snake spat out the snake letter, its eyes fixed on Roy, and it exuded a strong evil spirit. Roar. The big snake opened its bloody mouth, and then sprayed out a large cloud of black mist and enveloped it. The black mist is very powerful. Once inhaled it will corrode the internal organs. Roy did not dare to neglect, and hurriedly dodged. However, although his speed was fast, the black mist was not bad, and it quickly became viscous. Roy's clothes and shoes were stained with black mist. Roy frowned. He found that the black mist could not only pollute his skin, but also corrode the fighting spirit armor. Damn it. Roy cursed secretly. He took out a bottle of potion and poured it into his mouth. The medicine took effect immediately, and the black mist was expelled from the body, but Roy did not feel relaxed because of this, but became more serious. When the big snake saw Roy drink the potion, its eyes lit up. Obviously, it also guessed what Roy drank, so it rushed over without waiting for the black mist to dissipate. Roy has no fear, his eyes are cold, and he greets him. When the two sides met, the big snake opened its fangs, bit Roy's shoulder, and then tore crazily. Roy's left leg had been broken, and he was struggling to retreat, but the big snake was hot on his heels. Roy kicked the big snake in the abdomen, and with this force, he broke free from the big snake's shackles. He jumped into the air, rolled and stood firm. The big snake's tongue wrapped around Roy's ankle, trying to drag him down. HMPH. Roy sneered, then shook suddenly. With a crisp sound, the big snake's tail was thrown off, dripping with blood. Holding the long sword in his right hand, Roy aimed at the big snake's neck and chopped it down. He mustered all his strength for this blow, because no matter what, he wanted to make the opponent understand a truth, that is, he was not so easy to bully. Under the pain of the big snake, its body contracted sharply, trying to increase the distance between Roy and Roy. However, Roy had expected this a long time ago, and the long sword in his hand stabbed fiercely into the snake's neck. Puff! The long sword pierced through the big snake's head. Wow! The big snake howled miserably, and its huge body fell limply. Is it finally solved? Roy gasped. He was exhausted from the fight just now, but his spirit was very uplifted because he won. This 9th level monster is very powerful, but, after all, he is a 9th level monster, and his soul power is not comparable to that of a monster of the same level, and his thinking is not clear enough. This gave Roy an opportunity to take advantage of, otherwise Roy would have to pay a huge price if he wanted to kill this monster, and he might lose his life. Roy picked up the crystal nucleus dropped by the big snake. This crystal nucleus was the size of a fist, purple-black in color, and exuded strange energy fluctuations. Roy was slightly taken aback when he saw the crystal nucleus. Is this the magic nucleus of the legendary level? Roy took out a silver-level magic core from the system backpack, compared the two, and found that they were not of the same grade at all. The energy contained in a silver-level magic core is only half of that of a gold monster. So that's it. I understand. The strength of this big snake has reached the early 9th stage, but its IQ is as high as that of a child. Roy suddenly realized, and then showed a joyful smile. Roar. Suddenly, the sunburst sounded in the depths of the forest. Immediately afterwards, large areas of trees collapsed and mud splashed. Roy was startled. He knew that a super beast was coming. Roy didn't care about other things, and fled back quickly. He knew that he could never be the opponent of that super fierce beast. Ho ho ho. Sure enough, in the next second, a behemoth appeared in the field of vision. This is a black leopard. Its body is more than 3 times larger than ordinary leopards, its hair is as hard as steel needles, its limbs are thick and powerful, full of terrifying power. Boom. Roy was slapped flying by the leopard's paw. Roy's body smashed several towering trees and fell to the ground. He felt as if his internal organs had been displaced, and the pain was unbearable. Roy struggled to get up and looked at the leopard. Roar. The leopard raised its head to the sky and roared, running towards Roy. Roy's face was solemn, and he knew that with his own strength, he would definitely not be able to stop this guy. Just when the leopard was about to rush in front of Roy, Roy turned and ran. Roy's speed was very fast, and in the blink of an eye, his back disappeared into the depths of the dense forest. The leopard didn't stop at all. It chased after Roy's figure. Its speed was very fast, but it still couldn't keep up with Roy's speed. Roar. The leopard roared, and its figure suddenly became smaller. The leopard actually turned into a human form. It stared angrily at the direction Roy was leaving, and then quickly disappeared into the dense forest. On the other side, Roy is walking through the jungle. His speed is getting faster and faster, and finally, he can't even see the afterimage. Roar. Suddenly, a roar sounded. Roy's heart trembled, and his steps stopped abruptly. He looked around vigilantly, and then slowly walked behind a stone. At the end of his vision, a huge tiger slowly walked towards him. It is full of momentum and has a strong killing intent. It seems that it is not simple and difficult to deal with. The size of the tiger is more than 2 meters high. Every time it takes a step, the ground will shake a bit, and it exudes a terrifying coercion all over its body. Roy swallowed. This tiger is very powerful. Roar. The tiger looked at Roy, and seemed a little puzzled. Why did another human come? Moreover, it also smelled blood. Roy ignored the tiger. His right hand tightly gripped the long sword, and then slowly drew it out. Shua, the sword edge was unsheathed, and a cold light suddenly appeared. Roar. The tiger roared, and then rushed towards Roy. Roy held up his sword to resist and fought with it. The tiger's claws are so sharp that Roy can't get close at all. He could only be forced to retreat.
Suddenly, the tiger scratched Roy's chest with one paw, leaving several wounds, and blood flowed out immediately.
Roy snorted, his body deflected from the attack. Roar. The tiger roared angrily and continued to attack. Boom boom boom. One man and one beast fought fiercely. Roy kept avoiding the tiger's attack, and then waited for an opportunity to counterattack. This tiger's attack is very sharp, and every move is fatal. If Roy is not careful, he may capsize in the gutter. Roar. The tiger roared again, and then bit Roy's arm. Roy was startled. He quickly raised his long sword to block. However, the tiger's bite force was so terrifying that Roy's sword was bitten by snow. Crack. Roy's left arm was bitten off, and blood shot out. Roy's expression was ferocious. He held back the pain, and hit the tiger's waist and ribs while journaling. Peefed. The tiger's belly burst open, and green blood sprayed out, staining Roy's clothes red. Roy staggered and fell to the ground. His eyes were red, fixedly staring at the injured tiger. Roy knew very well that with his current strength, he couldn't kill this 9th level monster, so he didn't choose to fight this tiger desperately, but chose to avoid the edge temporarily. The tiger didn't fall down immediately after being injured, but stared at Roy with hatred, obviously trying to swallow Roy alive. Roar. The tiger roared and rushed towards Roy with all its teeth and claws. Roy's legs were slightly bent, and then jumped into the air, avoiding the tiger's bite. Although the tiger had been severely wounded, its fighting spirit was still very strong. As soon as Roy landed, it slapped Roy with its paws. Roy quickly raised his long sword to resist. Dang, Roy felt a huge force coming, and he flew upside down, smashed hard on a big tree, and then slid to the ground. Roy spat out a mouthful of blood foam, and felt that the bones of his whole body seemed to be broken, especially his left arm, which was severely paralyzed. Roar. The tiger roared and rushed towards Roy, its sharp claws flashing with a faint blue light, slashing towards Roy's neck. Roy's pupils shrank suddenly, and a cold arc appeared at the corner of his mouth. His palms were pressed against the ground, and with a flick of his body, he rushed out instantly, and then held the long sword, facing the tiger's claws. Roy knew that he could not be the opponent of this 9th-level monster, so he wanted to take a gamble. Maybe he had a chance. Roy's long sword pierced the tiger's belly, and the tiger's claws slapped Roy fiercely. Bang. A gust of wind swept over, making Roy almost unsteady. Tiger and Roy took several steps back at the same time. Roy's face was pale and his throat was sweet, but he wasn't in the least bit intimidated. He has won this battle. A fist-sized hole appeared in the tiger's abdomen, and blood flowed out. Roar. The tiger growled angrily, and charged at Roy. Death. Roy yelled angrily, stabbed the tiger's head with the long sword, and the tiger's paw swung at Roy. Roy slammed on the brakes, narrowly dodging the tiger's attack, and then slammed his long sword on the tiger's shoulder, 207, cutting off a piece of meat, dripping with blood. The tiger roared wildly in pain, and then slapped Roy with its paw. Roy didn't dare to resist, and twisted his body to avoid the tiger's attack. The tiger slapped its paw on a towering ancient tree next to it, and the big tree broke instantly. Roy's eyes froze slightly. The tiger's strength was too great. Ordinary weapons could not cause any damage to it at all. At this moment, the tiger jumped up and bit Roy's head. Get out. Roy roared. The long sword in his hand plunged into the tiger's mouth, and the point of the sword penetrated its head. The tiger let out a scream, its body limp on the ground, twitched a few times, and finally died. Roy breathed a sigh of relief. The strength of this 9th-level monster is indeed terrifying. If he doesn't use his unique skills, Roy probably won't be able to last long. However, I have to say that this night's battle was quite rewarding, and they gained a lot of combat experience, which is extremely precious to them. It's just that he has suffered a lot. After all of them are vicious, almost terrifying. Existing this is very uncomfortable for him, although there is nothing wrong with surviving. But killing too much is not a good thing. It will be dawn soon. As long as it is dawn, you can enter the town, take a hot bath, and then have a good sleep, wake up and have a big meal. He is not short of money now. For him, he now has a lot of precious beasts in his hand, and the colors of the skins are quite valuable, so he is short of money to use them, but there is one problem that he can't figure out. Why are there so many Warcraft? My location is not far from the town, but there are countless monsters, which is completely unexpected. Don't these guys usually send soldiers to clean it up? The existence of these things will pose a great threat to them, and these threats cannot be changed. Although the damage and level of these things are not very high, hunters should want to clean them up no matter what. They must have this idea. Soon after dawn, he swaggered into the city, first found a store, and sold all the precious wild animal skins in his hands, as well as various materials, all of which were good materials, which he sold for a fortune. Now he is not short of money to spend money. For now he is not short of money. He can find a good hotel, then have a good meal and take a hot bath. Finally, get a good night's sleep, and it will be almost the same at night. He has always been a night owlet, and for him, this night action is the best choice. Because there are many choices at night, and these choices cannot be adapted and changed. After all, most things are that people cannot control people, and there are too few things that can be controlled, even if they can be controlled. It is also not within the scope of control. He is very clear about this. Roy sold the materials in his hands for a large sum of money, and he is now a little rich, although not as rich as the wealthy one. However, high consumption in this city for half a year is no problem. He found the best hotel to stay in. The purpose is very simple, that is, a good hotel is cost-effective and more secure. And these hotels have a lot to offer. Especially those hotels, they have a place dedicated to practicing and exercising. At the same time, almost all big hotels are a mixed bag, and all walks of life have their own sources of information from them, which is very important. What kind of situation is on the Dark Continent? No one knows what kind of situation, so now it is a process of understanding slowly. Only after figuring out the rules and habits here can the following things be done. Otherwise many things cannot be done. Of course there is one more point. Roy doesn't want to expose himself easily now, in this place. Once he shows his weakness, it will be troublesome. The current situation is complicated, and my own strength is not strong enough. Whether it is human or biological, their strength is very strong here. Regarding this point, he knows that he must find a good partner now, a partner who can be trusted, who can share joys and sorrows, and who can share life and death together. This Roy is currently very urgent. Without a partner, he is nothing. Because if you want to survive and survive in this place, you must have a partner. And one is still not enough, but in the current situation, he is already content with having one partner. But I am not familiar with the place here, so I want to find a partner with the same philosophy. That's almost an improbable thing. Roy had a good meal, took a hot bath and lay on the bed, ready to fall asleep. The door was knocked awake. He turned over in an instant. If it wasn't the waiter, then who would it be? After all, the hotels here are almost generally not intrusive. Need cleaning or something? Other services are just a push of a button next to the bed. Those who come to knock on the door with curses like this are not the enemies they seek, they are robbers, or they are bad people. Roy walked warily to the door. Who is outside? Don't keep knocking on my door, talk about something. But there was no movement outside, which made him a little annoyed. Which bastard had been knocking on the door? It seemed that he wanted to wait for him to open the door so that he could rush in. Roy frowned. He definitely won't let the other party's plan succeed, but there is another point he can't understand, that is, isn't the other party afraid of attracting security guards if he keeps knocking on the door so loudly? Logically speaking, when he encountered harassment he also pressed the button, and the security guard should be coming soon, but there was no movement. Noisy and chaotic footsteps could be heard outside, but the knocking on the door never stopped. Moreover, the sound of knocking on the door was extraordinarily clear in the noisy footsteps, and it was extraordinarily clear. He really wanted to go out and give the opponent a punch, but after thinking about it, it was better to bear with it. After all, many things will pass with patience. If you rush out to fight with others, it's okay to win, but if you don't win, it's hard to say. Because this is the Dark Continent, the rule here is that the strong survive, and the weak can only wait for death. Suddenly the knocking on the door stopped. His heart reached the apex again. If the other party kept knocking, he wouldn't be too worried, but if the other party didn't move, it meant that the other party must be planning other plans. Either they are preparing to break in, or they are preparing to come in from other places. In short, the other party is not good at coming. As for whether the other party is a person or what it is, other creatures are still unclear, but there are screams and screams outside, and even very chaotic footsteps. It has already shown that the problem outside is very serious. Fortunately, the door is still very strong. No matter how the guy knocks, the door will not move at all, except that the sound is a bit loud. Just when he was thinking about whether the other party would sneak in through the window, suddenly there was another knock on the door. This time the knock on the door was even more urgent. Roy held a black iron sword in his hand, ready to deal with the enemies who broke into the door at any time. In the next second, the gate was shattered, and a humanoid ant taller than a human rushed in, bared its teeth, and rushed towards him. Without hesitation, Roy directly used Hunter x Hunter's exclusive skill to enchant the black iron sword and pierced through the ant, but there were many humanoid ants outside. They frantically rushed over from all directions. Damn. Roy cursed under his breath. He is now surrounded and unable to escape. If you can't kill enough enemies as soon as possible, then you will be waiting for death and hunger. He gritted his teeth, brandishing the black iron sword, desperately slashing and killing the humanoid ants swarming around him. Every attack will inevitably take away a life, but it is obvious that for these fearless guys, no matter how hard Roy slashes, there is no way to wipe them out. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain coming from his back. His body flew out involuntarily, hit the wall and fell to the floor. His chest became numb, and it became more and more difficult to breathe. He knew that his wound was open and blood was spurting from it. Roy struggled to get up and keep fighting, but found that he could not move. At this time, a group of human-shaped ants had already approached him, and the front one was raising its sharp forelimbs and stabbing down towards his neck. Roy closed his eyes in despair. His heart almost stopped beating. However, the expected pain did not appear. Instead, a series of clanging metal collisions sounded in my ears. He opened his eyes and looked, and found that a black long sword was holding the forelimb of the humanoid ant. What's going on? Roy frowned suspiciously, looked up, and saw that the person who saved one of his just now was actually his companion. At this moment, she was squatting in front of Roy, looking at the front with indifference. Roy hurriedly asked, "Why are you helping me?" The girl didn't speak, but instead reached out and grabbed the foreleg of the humanoid ant, and pulled it aside violently. With a click, the forelimb of the humanoid ant was instantly broken into 2 pieces. The humanoid ant let out a mournful wail, and the other hand quickly struck towards the girl, wanting to give it a fatal blow. The girl let out a cold snort, and punched it with her left hand. The humanoid ant was immediately pushed back a long way, and fell to the ground, unable to stand up again. The girl withdrew her right hand and walked slowly to Roy's side. Roy looked at her, and suddenly opened his mouth wide in surprise. How is it possible? You are not an ordinary person. Because Roy discovered that the girl's fingernails became sharp and slender, and a light blue light could be faintly seen flowing through the gaps between the nails, and even the skin was slightly fluorescent, making people feel as if she was covered with a layer of light. Yarn, the whole person is full of mystery. She glanced at Roy and said, "Get out of here quickly, this place is already surrounded by ants." After finishing speaking, she walked out of the room with the black iron sword in her hand. Roy was stunned for a moment, and followed. The situation outside was even worse. Originally, was just a few sporadic humanoid ants, but now they swarmed over. The girl gave a cold snort, and fought bravely with a black iron sword in her hand. Humanoid ants fell to death wherever she went. She didn't seem to be afraid of this kind of human-shaped ants at all. Every time she knocked over an ant, she immediately ran to the other side and continued to kill with the iron sword. Roy, on the other hand, hid carefully to avoid being accidentally injured by humanoid ants. The 2 of them fought all the way, and soon rushed to the center of the city square. There were more humanoid ants gathered here, and they surrounded them densely. At this moment, the girl suddenly said, "Get out of the way." Hearing this, Roy immediately dodged to the side, and at the moment he dodged, a huge humanoid ant just rushed over. Its body surface is covered with hard carapace, and the fangs in its hands are as thick as the mouth of a bull. It rushed up ferociously and bit the girl's shoulder. The girl uttered a scream in pain, and the black iron sword in her hand was thrown away by the huge humanoid ant. At the same time, its other fangs stabbed into the girl's abdomen. Poochie, with a sound, blood spurted out. A big hole was poked out of the girl's stomach. The great pain made her tremble all over, and tears rolled down the corners of her eyes. She gritted her teeth, resisted the injury, kicked her legs, and slammed her knees against the head of the huge humanoid ant. The huge humanoid ant took 2 steps back in pain, and the girl took the opportunity to pull out the fangs stuck in her abdomen, staggered back, and then fell to the ground. "Hey, are you okay?" Roy hurried up to support her. The girl shook her head and said, "I'm fine, I just lost a lot of blood and need to rest." Roy looked at her abdomen worriedly. "Should I take you to the hospital?" "No need. I can still hold on. Let's get rid of these guys first." As she spoke, the girl picked up the black iron sword she discarded, walked to the human-shaped ant colony with gritted teeth, and fought hard again. Roy sighed. Although he was still anxious, he had no way to stop him. He could only silently take out his bow and arrow, aim at the humanoid ant colony, and pull the trigger. A series of 10 feathered arrows shot out, tearing a gap in the humanoid ant colony. Roy quickly grabbed the girl and said, "Let's go." "No. I want to kill them all," the girl shouted angrily. "I don't care. Anyway, you are injured, I must take you out of here." Roy froze. He really didn't expect this girl to be so stubborn, but he really likes it, and stubborn people are usually not so bad-hearted. What's more, this girl has saved herself, so it's even more different. So he still has a good impression of this girl. But sometimes being too stubborn is not necessarily a good thing. After all, they are in danger now. The ants will soon track them down if they don't leave quickly. Moreover, these human ants are very powerful in fighting, and they also have a high fighting will and fighting quality. They are specially trained and have human-like thinking. Compared with the ants I met in the village last time, the difference is too much. If I continue to consume here, I don't know what kind of existence I will meet. But no matter how much he persuaded the girl, she would not listen, until the earth was broken, and suddenly a huge monster emerged from the ground. This scene made everyone dumbfounded, and it wasn't just as simple as being dumbfounded, but also because of the huge monster, which was a bit unusual. The girl in the combat uniform is very stubborn. She claims to be Hunter x Hunter, and she wants to protect the residents of the town. In any case, it is impossible to watch the humanoid ants destroy this small town and kill all the people. Roy sighed. He didn't want to be nosy at first, but this girl saved his life, so he can only take out his weapon and fight side by side. "I know you are very good, I believe in you." The girl looked at Luo Bian firmly. Roy nodded. Although he is a Hunter x Hunter, his strength far surpasses those so-called master hunters, and even ordinary legendary hunters may not be his opponent at certain times. "Do I need help?" Roy asked. What he was most worried about now was that there were too many humanoid ants and they seemed to have some skills to summon creatures such as giant spiders. If that happened, Roy and this girl would definitely not be able to resist. Roy and the girl walked into the forest. Not long after entering, he felt the wind blowing around him, which made Roy a little vigilant. Roy took out the cross-sword from his arms and held it tightly. At the same time, he also drew out the bow and arrow behind him. Suddenly, a chill went straight down the spine, and Roy suddenly turned his head to look at a tree, where 10 large butterfly cockroaches were hovering above. The centipede was black in body, about 5 meters long, and its tail was 7 or 8 meters long. At this moment, it was staring at Roy with cold eyes. "I hate bugs." Roy frowned, then threw the cross-sword in his hand at the centipede, and the cross-sword flew towards the centipede with a sharp whistling sound. The centipede opened its bloody mouth and spit out a cloud of thick green mist towards the cross-sword, knocking the cross-sword to the ground immediately. Seeing this, Roy's face became ugly. He didn't expect such a thing to happen. Hiss! The centipede swung the barbs on its tail and rushed towards Roy. Roy took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the centipede's head. The moment Roy was about to attack, Roy felt a sense of crisis enveloped him, and he hurriedly turned and jumped away. Boom! Accompanied by a loud noise, the place where Roy was standing was knocked out of a big hole by the centipede. The centipede flew into the air again, its body twisted a few times, and then continued to pounce on Roy. This time, its speed was much faster than the previous one, and it obviously regarded Roy as an enemy. Roy pedaled hard on the ground, and the whole person leapt into the air with the elasticity.